Good evening, and welcome to our Committee of the Whole meeting for May 21st, 2018. Thank you for coming. Anybody who wants to follow along with our agenda tonight, for those at home, if you want to go to our website, livoniapublicschools.org, highlight over the board tab, and you'll see agendas, and you can hover over that, and you can see our agenda, and you can follow along. Anyone who's in the audience can go outside of the door to the right, and you can get a copy of the agenda as well as any blue slips for audience communication. For you Committee of the Whole junkies who are going to turn in tonight, you're going to notice that we have a slight deviation from our normal order of items. You'll see that normally we begin with our building and site, but we're going to begin tonight with our finance. We're sort of front-loading our agenda tonight with the items that may take a little bit longer to discuss. And then our other items will be following up after those. So we're going to get right into it, and item one is audience communications. I do not see any blue slips. Is there anybody with a blue slip? No blue slips. So we'll go right into our Committee of the Whole, and we have one item to discuss, and that is our board meeting schedule for the 2018-2019 year. And Mrs. Oquist.
Thank you, President Johnson. I'd like to share with the board a draft of our meeting schedule for 2018-2019. It's difficult to believe, but we are already wrapping up the year, and we have meetings scheduled through June. And as is our normal protocol, we will review the board meeting schedule for next year. So we discussed it in the study session, but I'll point out a couple of dates that may be a bit of a deviation from where we may normally be. So as you take a look at the second page in your packet, on the left-hand column we have the regular board meeting schedule. The center column will be the committee meeting schedule, and the third column will be the study sessions and workshops. So our practice is to bring items initially to our study sessions, and you'll see that study sessions are then followed by a committee meeting within normally a week, if not 2 weeks, depending on perhaps a holiday schedule that may be in there, followed by a regular board meeting. A little unique is in July. Our first meeting on July 23rd will begin with an organizational meeting, during which time we will review our board protocols, and we will also review this calendar and vote on that for our during the regular board meeting that evening. In June, just as a side note, we'll vote on having the July 23rd meeting. So all of those meeting schedules always need to be voted on ahead of time, as you know. In June, we'll cover the meeting schedule for July, but at the organizational meeting, we'll discuss the vote that will be upcoming regarding our regular meeting schedule. There are 2 dates during the year for committee meetings on which the meeting would be held on a Tuesday. The first Tuesday is January 22nd. That follows Martin Luther King Jr. Day, which is observed in our school district on the 21st, on that Monday. So we will have our committee meeting on the Tuesday, the 22nd in that month. Then if you go all the way down near the bottom of the calendar, our May committee meeting, which will allow us to have a meeting prior to our June voting meeting, that will be held on the day after Memorial Day. So it'll be May 28th. That's a Tuesday because we are not in session on that Monday. Other than that, the meeting schedule is pretty straightforward, and so we would recommend this for your approval.
Any questions or comments? It looks good, so we'll just put that on.
We will, yes.
Okay.
And it was noted during our study session, I just wanted to bring up that we normally do add on workshops during our non-scheduled meeting Mondays. So you'll see that there are some months where we may have a meeting not scheduled for a Monday, and so I'll be working with President Johnson on Wednesday during our weekly meeting to look at dates where we can add at least a couple of workshops during the school year for the board.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Elquist.
You're welcome.
All right, then that'll move us to item 3, Finance Committee, and Mrs. Bonifield.
Thank you, President Johnson. For the Finance Committee, we have 3A, which is the budget update and recommendations, and Mrs. Superintendent Oquist and Mrs. Smith will be presenting for us.
Thank you. Mrs. Bonnefield, we are going to toggle a bit back and forth between the PowerPoint presentation and our cabinet members presenting the different parts of the budget.
Great.
Similar to what we did last week when we discussed this in our study session. And so we are going to start with, on the second slide, a review of what we'll cover this evening. The first item will be the final budget amendment for 17-18. So the first thing that Mrs. Smith will go through this evening is to take you through our June budget amendment. And so, well, yes, it will be June because we'll vote in June. And so this is our end of the year budget amendment where we will share with you the entire budget and where we end with our fund balance this year and where we will begin the following year. Then we'll move back into the presentation with regard to recommendations for the coming year, including use of the Wayne County Enhancement Millage based on the priorities that were established when we first went out to the community, asking them to support the millage. So that will be included in our budget recommendations for 18-19. And then we're actually going to take another look ahead and do some big picture planning as well. So our first portion of the evening will be on the final budget amendment, and I'm going to turn that over to Mrs. Smith.
Wonderful, thank you very much. In your board packet this week was the budget book for the final amendment for the 2017-18 school year, so I thought we could walk through that. The first page in the book is the resolution for the general fund revenues. Projected revenues are up $2.6 million from our December 1st amended budget. In March, I updated the board that I expected us to be up $2.2 million due to the sale of property, the Wayne Reese's special ed transportation payment, and increase in the transfer from our special ed fund. So this revenue is slightly up from that, another $400,000. And the large change since March is recognizing some additional state aid revenue, in particular our 31A at-risk money. On the next page is our detailed budget by function, state function code for the general fund. Expenditures are projected to be up $1.9 million from our first amendment in December. And we did cover that they'd be up approximately $2.2 million when we did our March update. So we have a few expenditures that won't be coming in this year. One of the larger ones are textbooks. We're not getting all those purchases in before June 30th, so that'll be an expense that we'll be recognizing in the 18-19 school year. Another change during our March study session and then during the April board meeting, we had approved the purchase of some school buses, and those two will be actually coming in and paid for in the next year's budget in 18-19. So the main driver in these changes, there's a few things that we didn't have in December when we were doing our budget amendment. The first off being the health insurance. Our open enrollment takes place in the fall, and then those elections take place or are effective January 1st. So we're seeing an adjustment during this budget amendment for actual enrollments for our employees. One thing we had mentioned in March too is that 3% refund from the Office of Retirement Services. That was about over $400,000 FICA expense that we had to recognize this year. That was that courts decided on after we had done our December amendment. So that was another large swing in the expenditures. So those are the biggest two changes that you'll see on the expenditure side. Our next sheet covers the funded projects fund, and just a reminder again, this is we keep it separate from the general fund just for our internal purposes. Another person in the office oversees this budget, so it's easier for us to manage keeping the fund separate. But when we do our final financial report for the state, these revenues and expenditures get included with the general fund. But we again split it out here, so. Not too much change to note on this page. Next page, we cover our athletic fund and the food service fund. You'll see expenditures are slightly up from the last time we looked at this in December in the athletic fund. On the food service fund side, we're expecting slightly lower expenses than where we were in December for our amendment. I'm happy to report on the food service fund that we are using that food service fund balance as we were recommended to be done by our auditors. There's a federal guideline that you can only keep so much reserve, so we were this year put in a new cafeteria line at Churchill, so and we'll continue to monitor that fund too and bring proposed purchases forward to the board. Next page, you'll see our special education fund. This is our Act 18 countywide program that we run the 4 programs for. On the first, when we were looking at the general fund revenues, I had mentioned the transfer from the special ed fund. And so we are transferring additional monies. During December, we proposed $1.7 million, and we're proposing jumping that to $2.1 million. We were taking a look at that Act 18 program and what would really be an appropriate amount to keep there kind of for emergency purposes or for maybe larger purchases that wouldn't be covered by the county. So I'm recommending a $1 million kind of target fund balance for that fund. Because we had a fund balance, we were able to do some additional scope at the Garfield Community Schools. The original budget out of the bond was $1.5 million, and we were able to do about $2 million worth of work at that location because we had this special education fund balance that we're able to transfer to the general fund and then to that capital projects fund. So.
Mrs. Smith, can I back up just a moment to the food service fund?
Sure.
We said we added a new cafeteria line at Churchill. Are we looking at doing that at Franklin and Stevenson also? I'm not sure if that's even a question for you, if it's really more directly for Mr. Francis or Mrs. Oakwest.
No, we've actually been waiting to do the Churchill line, which is the original equipment. So Franklin and Stevenson have different setups, as you know, and their items are more up to date than Churchill's original built-ins that were there. So Food Service Department has been having its eye on Churchill and knowing that the renovations were coming up. This is sort of a nice tie-in to do it at this time. So we'll be installing all those items over the summer because we need to do a little electrical work for the new items as well. So it's just Churchill.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
One item we're looking to for the food service fund is our kitchen equipment. So in particular, some of the stoves are quite old. That's one of those items that is on the MDE approved equipment purchases or approved list of equipment. So we wouldn't have to go to them for approval, but because of the dollar amount, we'd still be bringing those to the board for approval should we decide to move in that direction.
Mrs. Frank, can you just remind us what funded projects are?
Sure. Those are grants, in essence.
Okay.
So grants, local, state, and federal grants. The biggest being the federal grant IDEA for our students with IEPs to support them. Next up would be the Title I at-risk funding for at-risk students. And then we also have some state grants in there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll move on next to our debt retirement funds. We currently have 3 debts outstanding, our 2013 Bond Series 1, Series 2, and 2014 refunding bond. Just a heads up on here, it was interesting. I did go to a conference and we were talking about the debt retirement funds, and I've learned that some districts keep it in one consolidated account, so we're not necessarily required to separate them out by type. So I thought that was interesting. I'll do some additional research and then bring forward a recommendation if that would make sense for our district. But for now, we keep them in 3 separate funds, and that's what is also in the proposed budget for 18-19. But the numbers here, primarily the only change is the interest income. We've been getting some better interest rates, so that's reflected in this final amendment. Next page is our various capital projects funds. The first one being our sinking fund. And then next up is our technology fund. This was a bond from a number of years ago that was related to upgrading the district's technology. So we still continue to have some money here. And it's really been useful and will continue to be useful too as we've made these technology purchases out of the 2013 bonds. We have these funds that can help keep that momentum going.
President Johnson.
Thank you. Mrs. Smith, is there a change in the law as to what we can use the sinking fund for?
There is, and with that change in law, it would, we can't start using the funds for those new purposes until we go out to renew the sinking fund. In fact, if we decide to expand the purposes of the sinking fund, it would no longer be a renewal, it would in essence be a new tax, so it would not be new money for our taxpayers, but it technically would be a new tax because of its new purposes that we could use it for. So I know.
Yep, we're going to be covering that in August. We had some preliminary conversation with the board at a study session with regard to the timeline for our sinking fund renewal and our operating millage renewal. So we'll be talking about that in more detail as we kick off the new year. But you're absolutely right, technology is an added component to the language. But that caveat is something that we'll want to explore as a district and as a board. Because then it can no longer be termed a sinking fund renewal, because you're utilizing the funds for a different purpose. In any case, the funds that you see here in this fund balance, even if we did move to including that new language, these funds could only be utilized for the purpose for which our voters voted to begin with. So it would only be any new monies that came from a future sinking fund approval.
And Mrs. Burton, you had a question.
The next fund down, the technology fund. See, as that came from a bond, is there a time limit during which you have to spend that money?
There is, and I know there was a requirement, and we've met that requirement that you have to spend,
Okay.
I believe it's
It's like 85% or something by a certain date.
So we met that target, but we're continuing again because the taxpayers voted for this particular purpose. We're continuing to keep those funds designated until they're fully spent, but we have met that target.
Okay. And just as a side comment, we get comments from community members periodically about why we group things together and why we separate things out that may or may not be exactly the same as they have to be reported to the state. Excuse me. For my purposes as a board member, I want to thank you for going to the additional work to separate things out for board members and for citizens in our community so that we can see a little bit more clearly, even though the state may allow us, as you said, to, for example, combine all of the bond series together. I think it's cleaner to see it separated out. And while that has got to be done in two different ways, I want to thank you for going to the extra effort, and I know your predecessors did also, to make it as clear as possible for those in our community to follow what's going on with the money.
That is our goal.
Thank you.
One other mention too, we've discussed this before, the last fund on here is that capital projects fund. And again, we recognize that our needs exceed the current allocations we have in our sinking fund and in the bond. And so what this is a way of setting aside some funds for those projects that we aren't able to touch with the sinking fund and with the bond. So that would be recommendations that would be coming to the board at future meetings of how we could use these resources. Next up is the 2013 bond fund. The one change of note you'll see on here is that transfer from other funds. So you may recall a while back, the board approved the transfer of $5 million from the sinking fund to cover some additional scope at Franklin and Stevenson. So this is recognizing that transfer this school year. Let's see. And then the scholarship fund, kind of the same. Nothing big there. And then on the health and welfare fund, there were some changes, but you can see the net fund balance isn't changing much. Again, since the December amendment was brought before the board, we now have actual enrollments, health insurance enrollments, so we were able to update those, the premiums, as well as the employee contributions for those.
Questions?
Wonderful. So that brings us to the end of the budget book, so we'll flip back to the presentation.
Okay, so Fred, if you could put us back on the screen. Alrighty. So we are going to move on to the next slide and talk about implementing our plan for support. So we're going to transition now, and members of our cabinet team will be presenting recommendations for the 18-19 school year. And just as a reminder, the Wayne County Enhancement Millage has truly allowed us a unique opportunity to move forward in areas of impact for our students, for our staff, and for our schools in a way that quite simply would not have been possible without the support of our community. We really can't understate it, and you'll you'll see that as we begin to discuss our budget, our fund balance, et cetera, and the impact of the Wayne County Enhancement Millage. We are thrilled to be bringing forward to the Board of Education this evening recommendations that are based on the needs of our students, based on significant assessment of our student achievement data, the data with regard to the needs, social, emotional, and behavioral needs of our students, the needs of our staff with regard to resources and support. And so we tied this all back and with a great deal of gratitude for the support of the community through the Wayne County Enhancement Millage. So without further ado, a reminder that these were the priorities that we had set forward when we first went out to the community and talked with them, asking for their support of the Wayne County Enhancement Millage. These were the priorities identified. The first is hiring and retaining high-quality staff for Livonia Public Schools, preserving and enhancing our programs and our offerings for students, maintaining our class size and reducing where feasible, supporting our struggling learners and our students with added needs, and growing the financial stability of our district so that we are able to do all of those aforementioned items. We highlight for you first the area of financial stability. By concentrating in that area, we are able to then focus on the four priorities that were initially identified for the community and for the board when we first began this important work. So I'm going to turn it back over to Mrs. Smith, and she's going to talk a little bit about this past school year and then factors of financial stability and talk a little bit about our fund balance.
Thank you. On this next slide, we'll see just a summary of what we looked at in detail in the budget book. For our final amendment, we are proposing a beginning fund balance of $16.7 million, revenues of $155.3 million, expenditures of $152.1 million, leaving us $19.9 million available to use the following year. That represents a 12.82% fund balance. And next up, on the next slide, we'll take a look at what are some factors of financial stability. The first one that we will look at is enrollment trends. And I wanted to mention that these are coming from the Department of Treasury. When they're looking at districts that are in financial distress, they look at these factors. So we're putting that, taking a look at those factors in terms of Livonia Public Schools. So that first up is enrollment trends. And just a reminder that we are still in a state of declining enrollment, unfortunately. We had 168 fewer students from the fall of 2016 to the fall of 2017, and we anticipate that continued to decrease for next year. Some of the things that we do know, for instance, at this point, Ladywood High School, we have shared time students that we're able to report and get revenue for there, and we know that Ladywood, this is their final year, so that's 40 FTE decrease that we'll experience for the 2018-19 school year. The next up is the revenue and expenditures, and the big picture is, are our expenditures surpassing the revenue collected each year, and what are the fluctuations in the state funding and in our cost. The idea being that if your expenditures continue to surpass your revenues, it's not sustainable. You're going to continually be eating into your fund balance, and eventually you're not going to have a fund balance left. So, next up would be the idea of one-time revenues versus ongoing revenues, and legacy costs for short-term costs. One-time revenues, for example, like the sale of property, we're able to recognize that both in the 2017-18 school year and in the 18-19 school year, but that's not necessarily something that we'll be able to continue every year. On the cost side, when we talk about legacy costs, that's typically looking at staffing. You know, we don't typically put staff in place for a year. We put them in for multiple years. Versus a one-time cost, for instance, like the purchase of school buses. We might not be buying those, every year, or textbooks. That dollar amount might change from year to year. And the last one being the fund balance is a factor of financial stability. The Michigan School Business Officials recommends a 15 to 20% fund balance. The statewide average in 2016-17 was 11.8%. And soon we'll be across the state closing our books for the 2017-18 school year, so we'll be able to see what that looks like as far as 2017-18 goes. On the next slide up, we'll look at where Livonia falls in relationship to other Wayne County districts. So these are ranked in order of fund balance percentage. This gives us a better picture, I think, when you look in terms of percentages, because different sized districts obviously would want to have a different dollar amount fund balance, but the percentage gives you a nice comparison. So you can see that Livonia ranks 22 out of 33 districts, and this was as of last year, that 8.9% fund balance.
And again, once our books are audited, once all of the other districts' books are audited, we will update this again in the fall with the fund balances both for, not only for our district, but across Wayne County.
And this is helpful, something to keep in mind, and we'll see on the next sheet too. We just wanted to highlight for you on the next slide some of the districts in our area in the western Wayne County. You can see Northville has a 20.9% fund balance, Plymouth Canton at 14.6, Redford Union 14.6, South Redford 13, Dearborn 12.6%, Wayne Westland 9.1, Livonia 8.9, and then Garden City 7%. So we wanted to give you some scope too, and we're looking at budget recommendations for the 18-19 school year, where that puts us, and maybe what an ideal target fund balance would be for Livonia Public Schools. So I wanted to get that information to you.
Mrs. Smith, can you just remind us how we get that percent, what that percentage means? I know we talk a lot about a healthy fund balance and that percentage, but could you just let us know again how we derive that number and why maybe, I saw on the previous slide, somebody was at 8.4%, but they only had 2.2 million. And we were right around there, and we have a lot more than that, and where those differences come in and how that's calculated.
Yep. The fund balance is an equation. It's your fund balance divided by your revenues. And there's a different way too, even within the Department of Treasury, when they're calculating at risk, they'll back out your restricted revenues and just look at what your unrestricted revenues are, meaning what we can spend on however we'd like. An example of a restricted revenue would be, for instance, the 31A funds. Those were given to assist our at-risk students, so they have to be used for that designated purpose. But the big picture fund balance percentages, and what I present to the board in the budget book, is the fund balance dollar amount divided by the revenues that we have brought in for that year. And that's how the other districts present their percent fund balance too. So for us with a $150 million revenue, for instance, then a 10% fund balance would equate to $15 million, whereas maybe a smaller district that has a $50 million revenue collection every year, 10% fund balance for them would be $5 million. So both of us being stable at that 10%, but the dollar amounts look vastly different.
Thank you.
Can we ask questions at this point?
Yeah.
A couple of questions as we go forward. So the recommendation is 15 to 20%. And the state average is 11.8, so we're slightly above at this time of the state average. But we're still, what I would say, significantly below what the recommended range is going forward.
And yes, sadly, that's still a result of the limited state funding that we get as a district. And as Andre said, we're very grateful for our Wayne County Enhancement Millage that has made so much possible. And here, what we've tried to do in our budget recommendations is balance financial stability with also putting some supports in place that are going to help our students entrusted to us. So it's definitely a tight walk, and you can see, most of the state is below that 15 to 20% fund balance, and I think districts across the state are struggling with that, wanting to have financial stability, but not at the cost of our current students.
Okay, if I put it in perspective, though, we're at this level because, in large part, because of the enhancement millage in Wayne County. Where would we be in our projections for our final amendment if we didn't have that enhancement millage?
Less than 7% would be our fund balance without the Wayne County Enhancement Millage for 17-18.
And what concerns me is we are now, we'll be 2 years in November?
Our third year of collection, but 2 years that we've been using the enhancement millage monies.
Okay, and based on what's happened in Lansing, I'm very fearful that when this comes around again in another couple of years, that enhancement millage isn't going to pass. So we're looking at, going forward, a situation where, just based on today's numbers, we're going to be at 7%. And if we lose that enhancement millage in a couple of years, we're not going to be in such great shape. Am I reading all of that right?
Should nothing else change. So that's something, though, we would continually look at ways that we can contain costs. We look at this, the stability of the things that we're putting into place right now to make sure that we're able to sustain that. So we do look out on multiple years to make sure that what we are recommending isn't going to put us back into a financial hardship. But you're completely right that the struggle is real to be supporting our students, but yet come even close to meeting that 15 to 20% recommended fund balance.
And what I'm looking at is, it tends to be a little rosy today. But going forward, we cannot depend on that enhancement millage to keep us where we're at.
And I think I think it's certainly something that I think all districts throughout Wayne County are very cognizant of, Mr. Johnson. And you'll see in some of our recommendations, there's a balance between our recommendations. In some cases, they're one-time costs. We just reviewed on that financial stability slide, one-time costs versus legacy costs, one-time revenue versus ongoing revenue. And so one of the things that we looked at balancing, and you'll see included in here, are recommendations for a pretty aggressive over the next 3 years textbook replacement cycle. And so those are, for the most part, one-time costs for this period of time, and then we'll be able to continue that at perhaps a little lower level, because we'll have done a pretty significant, covered, I believe, 35 content areas by the time we're done. Some of the bus purchases, so we were able to purchase some bus and maintenance vehicles this year, and we have a recommendation to purchase some next year as well. And so we're balancing, some of the recommendations you'll see coming forward are those that would include legacy costs, so costs that would continue to go on, and some of those that are one-time costs. And so certainly very, very cognizant that we're walking that balance between utilizing these funds for the students in our district at this point in time, but also being judicious and being able to continue to be financially stable as we move forward. So definitely keeping an eye on both fronts.
Thank you.
Mr. Centers?
Yeah, and I want to thank Allison for highlighting that. We have significant needs for cutting for a decade, putting off purchases for a decade, pay freezes for a decade. So Mark had a great point that, if it wasn't for this enhancement, we wouldn't be in great shape. So things really do need to get fixed on the state level, because our needs are not going anywhere. We're still going to have significant needs, although we're trying to address some of them. There's so much more that we could do, and even in the study session, when we were first presented with what we'll see coming up, some additions, we all wanted to do more. So thank you for trying to strike that balance.
No, go ahead.
Mrs. Smith, I want to kind of follow up on that. I know we talk about the enhancement millage, and in Wayne County, we're extremely lucky to be able to have that extra money. The majority of the other counties in the state are not. Is the money that we're spending on the enhancement money that we're spending, is that like bells and whistles for us, or are we actually going back and these are needed programs that we're just not, under the regular state funding, able to provide?
These are definitely some of the core items that we're going to, nothing above and beyond. These are definitely the core things, and as we'll see on the next couple of slides, some of these things are desperately needed. They're going to do a lot of good. Definitely no bells and whistles. But maybe one day, yeah.
These are really critical areas of need that exist, and as we take I don't know if you recall, I'm sure you do, when we made the presentation last year with regard to the budget, we actually highlighted the approximately $20 million in cuts that had been made over the prior 8 years. So I know certainly you understand as a board, as we look to make some of these recommendations, we are in no way, shape, or form being able to restore all of those pieces. But what we have been able to do is have really deep and thoughtful dialogue about, for the pieces that we are either going to add or enhance, what are those that we believe can make the most impact at this point in time for our students and for our staff. So it would be that even if we were able to, we may or may not restore every piece, because certainly the needs of our students have changed, the needs within our schools have changed. So what you'll see over the next bit of time are really those priorities identified, taking into account the Wayne County Enhancement Millage priorities, but then also taking a look at our own needs within the district.
So from what you're saying, even with the enhancement millage, we still have critical needs that are not funded for our students.
We do. We are still very strong advocates for adequate school funding, and having our state take a very serious look at the most recent funding collaborative study. And we'll continue to get into that over the course of next year, and really working to educate our community, to educate our staff about the importance of moving our lawmakers toward that model.
Okay. And Mrs. Burton, thank you for allowing me to step in there. Please go ahead.
Perfectly
Thank
fine. Those who are sitting at this table are very aware, but for the benefit of the public who may not be looking at some of the things that we are looking at coming at us within, either at a time unknown to us, or we know they're coming within the next year or two. Our retirement costs and our health care costs continue to go up, and when those go up, they go up in the range of millions at a time. Our enrollment trends, as we said, are unfortunately still going down, which means we need to account for less revenue coming in each year. We're also right now in a very blessed situation where we have all of our employee groups' contracts are settled for this year, but that means they are all up for renegotiation next year. We need to put ourselves in a position where we can be prepared to handle those. And during the time of some of the board members who are sitting here right now, we lived through in October where $470 per student was taken from us after our budget was already set for the year. That was millions of dollars that came out of our budget. Had we not had a fund balance, we would have been in a dire situation. The fund balance that had been built up prior to the recession, which is still really fresh in all of our minds, is what allowed us to get through that recession without decimating our programs. But these are all enormous dollar ticket items that we have to be prepared for, which is why we have to have a fund balance. If we hadn't had one, we would not be the Livonia Public Schools that we know today. And this board is charged with making sure that we are financially stable. So I very much appreciate the balancing act that this cabinet is doing with the recommendations that they're bringing forward to both keep our fund balance strong and at the same time put our money behind our students and our programs, and in doing so, our employees also. When we say when that $470 million or 470 per student hit, that was millions out of our budget, and what that means is it's fewer people that we can hire to work with our students. Our students lose out, and our employees lose out both. And when both of those are losing, our community is also. So we have to keep our fund balance strong so that we can support our students, support our employees, and have a strong school district for this whole community. But these are big ticket items that we've got to keep on the horizon.
Anybody else? Okay. Thank you for indulging us in the round of questions.
Great questions.
So
Great
please,
questions.
please move forward.
Next up, we'll be hearing from Steve, and he's going to be addressing hiring and retaining high-quality staff, another one of our priorities with the Wayne County Enhancement Millage.
Thank you, Allison. And as we all know, that as a district, we can only be as good as the individuals that we employ. You'll see from the bullet points there, we think some of the key points that help us attract and retain high-quality staff. We have multi-year agreements with all of our bargaining groups, which was mentioned earlier. Certainly, this provides a sense of stability and assurance for our current employees. It is attractive to prospective employees. We have collective bargaining agreements which provide pay raises for 2 consecutive years, this year and next, probably the first time in over a decade. So certainly, again, attractive to both current and prospective employees. The health insurance premiums, that continues to go up and up, largely outside our control, control of our employees. And in this past round of negotiations, we, as a district, tried to do some things to help mitigate those costs for our employees by taking a larger percentage of the overall contribution, and by also offering a variety of plans from which members could choose. They could evaluate, and based on the deductibles or the insurance or the medication plan or the co-insurance and so forth, they could evaluate which plan might work best for them in their individual situation, and as a result benefit from a little bit of a lesser premium. But again, they had some choice in that. When it comes to the hiring process, while we don't just turn around and fill vacancies with an entry-level position. We've gone through an interview process, and the candidate that rises to the top is someone with some experience or some specific qualifications. Then we look at that person and we try to bring them in. We do try to bring them in at a point where they would be in an equal spot financially to someone who's been in our district with similar experience or qualifications, but we certainly try to recognize that as best we can and use that as a tool to attract folks to the district and again, bring in quality staff. You've heard last year, and you'll hear a little bit more tonight, about the additional direct student supports, and it goes without saying that those are direct benefit to students, but they also aid our instructional staff in best meeting the needs of individual students, and reinforcing that, again, that it's a collaborative effort and sharing the responsibility. Lastly, if you look at those points, and then you also consider the renovations that are going on throughout the district, essentially, enhancing all of our employees' work environments with some of the latest and most current finishes and technology and alike. I think our current employees should take a look at their current situation, and we should all feel pretty good to be in the position that LPS is in today. And I trust, as to our folks looking to find a place to work, that we continue to be an attractive option for prospective employees. So again, hiring and retaining high-quality staff is of significant importance to us.
Okay, so now we're going to move on to the next section, and we'll really highlight these 3 bullet areas that we discussed a little earlier, and so I'll have us move on to the next slide. Our focus over the past few months was to create a plan of action which included differentiated supports, and you'll hear a little bit more about that, so supports based on the needs of specific students or specific schools that would impact both academic outcomes for students as well as social emotional needs of our students. So these priorities will look familiar to you. We talked about these last year when we first made our recommendations to the board as we first began utilizing some of our Wayne County Enhancement Millage funds. We thought it was important that we utilized an extensive amount of data in our decision-making and to inform our needs moving forward, to take input from our folks within the district who work most closely with each of these programs. And so here are some of the priorities that we discussed. We talked quite a bit about the current state of reading achievement in Livonia Public Schools. We've certainly shared that with the board, and we've shared that as an area of focus, in an area where we are looking to grow and continue to move forward as a school district for each of our students. We talked about the need for consistent, high-quality Tier 1 instruction, and Tier 1 instruction can really best be described as what would every child in every classroom by every teacher every day experience as part of their learning. So Tier 1 is meant for every child in the classroom. We looked at the impact of student social emotional needs on learning, and we shared with you data about student needs and assessments, risk assessments that were completed, and needs that our students exhibited. We talked quite a bit about the implementation of the third grade reading bill and the tenets that are included within the language. So there were pieces that we needed to include this year in our work and that continue to grow over the next number of years. Some of those are pieces such as having literacy coaches available for job-embedded professional development, et cetera. We looked at the importance of literacy proficiency, not just for our youngest learners, although certainly you will see there is a significant focus on K-3. And part of that is based on our state legislation. Part of it is also based on if we can build that strong foundation, the need for intervention at the older grades is less likely. So we looked at the impact of literacy proficiency across all grades and content areas, because that is so core to students being able to access all content areas as they move forward through the curriculum. We talked quite a bit about the impact of poverty and risk factors on our students, and especially on particular schools, and then ultimately learning and school success for all of our students. These were the priorities that we initially identified last year, and as we reviewed them, we strongly believe that each of these are pieces that needed to be our priorities as we made recommendations for this coming year.
This slide is also something that should look familiar to you. When we presented last year, we shared with you that we would be collecting data. So last year we presented our plan for 3 years, and we're at the end of the first year that we will begin to collect our end of the year reading data, math data. When M-STEP results are out, hopefully, over the summer or early fall, we'll be looking at behavior data and say the supports that we've put into place, are they making a difference? What can we tie to the supports that each building is getting, each focus area that we are focusing on? So as we present what we'd like to do for this next year, the 18-19, and present to you, we will continue to have this as a focus and collect data on what areas that we're trying to improve student learning.
Now we're going to get to talk about elementary level and what we're kind of excited about, what the supports that we have determined that we would like to put into place, not just for that happened this school year, but a continuation, and then looking at what else for the following year. So on this slide, you'll see that we're looking at supports for all schools. And again, as was mentioned earlier, that our priorities remain the same as looking for how we can support our struggling students, as well as keeping class size down wherever feasible. So the very first bullet, allocation for schools for teacher stipends for before and after school learning interventions and instruction, specifically on academics. And this would be a continuation. We may adjust the amount depending upon at the end of the year how much of the funding was used for this year, and make a determination what we feel is good for next year. The second bullet is additional elementary support teacher positions. Right now, we have each K-4 school has one EST, and then we allocated, I think, was it 4 more throughout for this year was brand new, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in just a little bit. Additional staffing allocation overall. That's going above and beyond what we do for our ratio, and again, we're going to talk more about that in detail. And then also looking at paraprofessional kindergarten support. This year, we had 8.5 full days in the fall. That means the first 2 weeks, they all had support for those first 2 weeks of school. And then an additional 10 days for, it says mid-year support, but basically throughout the year, they could make a plan as to how they would use those supports. And they all kind of decided in different directions. Sometimes they put them together. So if you had 4 teachers, then you would have 4 times 10, you would have 40 full days, or they could break them apart and do 80 half days. So they had all different kinds of plans with that. So I look forward to the kinds of planning that will happen for next year with using this same type of planning. On the next slide, it's talking about differentiated need. And this is where we start looking at factors that will impact how we do our allocations. And we're looking at free and reduced counts, the EL numbers, total student enrollment, possibly achievement data, and all of that is in the midst of being collected now. And of course, we'll wait until the end of the school year to get the rest of it. But basically, the very first bullet, this year we added 4.5 FTEs and ESTs, which is at the K-4 level, and then ESEP from this year. So to explain that again just a little bit, we have 4 additional ESTs in the K-4, and then 0.5 ESEP that we put into the 5-6 school. And we're looking at adding 3 additional FTEs for EST, which would make 7 ESTs, and then the 0.5 for the ESEP in the 5-6. That would be able to help with academics, social-emotional, medical needs, you name it, and our EST, I think, does it.
So just for our community listening, we know that the board understands that an FTE is a full-time equivalent, and so that reference, whenever you'll hear that quite a bit tonight. So you'll hear that in relation to what most of our cabinet members will be presenting. So an FTE is a full-time equivalent. That simply means a full-time allocation of a staff member.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
On that second bullet, additional staffing allocation for flexibility in the special schedule for the intervention block implementation. And this would also be a continuation. This year we were able to add additional staffing within specials so that then they could have common intervention time, specifically at the K-4 level, but also at the 5-6. So again, we'd be looking at adding another FTE or more to be able to spread out with that special schedule. On the third bullet, additional FTEs to maintain current class size and lower where feasible. And again, that would be a continuation. And we'd like to really show you what the impact of that and what our commitment has been. So when we look at this slide, I want you to look down at the bottom right-hand corner. In that bottom right-hand corner, it shows the district staffing ratios. And what that means is when we're looking at kindergarten, we look at our hard cap for us, and this is self-imposed, that we would have no more than 26 students in a classroom to 1 teacher. In grades 1 through 3, we would have 27.5 to 1. And basically, that could mean that you could have some classrooms that have 28, 29 in it, but that you could also have other classrooms that would have 25 and 26. So again, this is an average. Grade 4 is staffed at 28.75 to 1 teacher, and grades 5 through 6 is staffed at 29.5 to 1. So now all those numbers, but as we all realize, those still seem kind of high, but that's what we staff at. But that's not what our commitment has been. Our commitment has been to try to lower class sizes as much as possible. So in 2016-17, before we had the enhancement millage in our hands, we had K through 6, we staffed at 229 classroom teachers were allocated. If we were to only use the staffing ratio and go strictly with that, we would have 221. So you can see that we added 8. Now again, we were in tighter times, so we didn't have that enhancement millage. You can start to see the commitment when you see 2017-18. In K-6, we have, this year, we have 238 classroom teachers allocated. If we were to go only to the staffing ratio, we would have 222 teachers. So that would mean that now which means that we have allocated 16 additional staff members to lower class size. In 2018-19, of course, this is projected right now, because we haven't allocated all of them. But as of now, K-6, we have 239 classroom teachers allocated. If we were to strictly go by the staffing ratio, it would be 221, and so that's 18. That means our class sizes are really nice class sizes for next year, and we believe that that will help support our staff in helping our struggling learners, as well as enriching for all the rest of our students. So
I just want to hop in here, and I want to thank Mrs. Scott for the detail that went into calculating this. It's not simply a matter of putting a couple of numbers down. It's recalculating the entire district elementary staffing using the ratios that are developed. And you'll see the ratios that are in the bottom right-hand corner have been in place for many years, with the exception, as Mrs. Scott said, of the hard cap at kindergarten, which is not required, that's self-imposed. But these are not contract maximums. Contract maximums are significantly higher than these numbers. So these are the district staffing ratios which we would utilize to initially allocate out the total number of teachers, or as we refer to that as FTEs, as far as how many classrooms we would allocate based on the number of students that we have. So really, this is something that is not only important for the board to know, but we feel is something that should be heralded throughout the community, as well as with our staff. The commitment this year, as we take a look at average class size across the district, you will see the impact of those additional 16 FTEs. That is a significant financial commitment. As you know, it's a significant commitment to our learners. Next year, that grows a bit to 18. And again, the impact of that can be seen as you look at the average class size across our entire district. Much lower than the district staffing ratios and significantly lower than those included in the contract maximums. So it's certainly something to celebrate. Great commitment by the board and the district.
Mrs. Burton.
The other thing that we learned when you presented this information, Mrs. Scott, in the study session just a week ago, was this also had a dramatic difference on the number of split classes that we have in our district. That we're down to very few split classes or multi-grade classrooms,
Absolutely.
which is a benefit to our students and our staff.
yes, absolutely. We do try to minimize that number as much as we can. Sometimes it's not possible, but we always try to start out in that direction and then see where our registrations take us throughout the summer. Yes.
I'm not sure if, I don't want to create a ton more work, but if we can, I would be interested in seeing where the staffing ratios would fall, where our numbers for FTEs would fall with, if we were forced to move to our contract maximums.
I can say we would be happy to do that. That will involve my friend, Mrs. Scott, and some
Sorry.
additional calculations on her part, but if you'd like that comparison, we'd certainly be happy to do that.
And I can explain the reason why I asked that question is because, right now, we have commitments that we're not required to do. We've got a lot of extra teachers, but should we run into a real crisis, I'd like to see the numbers of where we could get to if we really, if the state really does not begin to start funding us and we have a real crisis on our hand where we have to go to contract minimums. And what that, or maximums, what that would look like if we got into that kind of a funding situation.
Okay, we can get that information.
Thank you.
Our contract maximums will go from 30 to 35,
Okay.
depending upon the grade level.
Yeah, so that's a lot. And I would like to,
And that's K through, or 1 through 4?
K, well, K
K
would
through
be
6.
30. If we were not going to do the self-imposed, then it would go up to 30.
okay.
Okay.
And Mrs. Frank, you had a question, I'm sorry.
So we talked a little bit about this in our study session, but I just wanted to come back to it. And I think the strength of our board right now is the diversity that we have. I think that it is a phenomenally effective board because we have such a diversity. I think we have some people who've been on the board for a long time that have some longevity. I think we have high school parents, and I think we have a recent high school graduate, kind of recent. And then I am living at the elementary. I'm not that recent, but you are recent. Kind of recent.
In Mrs. Jarvis.
Yeah, in Mrs. Jarvis. But I think, but I live at this little kid level. So I have little kids, and I have a kindergartner who's coming into the district next year. So this is kind of where I see a lot of what we're doing as a board, and I also agree with, we have got to maintain our financial stability. I think, Mrs. Smith, what you said earlier, it is such a balance, and it's such a tension to live in that tension between spending money on the kids that we have, but being wise fiscal managers of the money that we've been entrusted to. So I don't know what that answer is, but I do want to advocate for these little ones that we have coming into the district and into our buildings. I think that when we talk about these little 5-year-olds that are coming into our schools, some of them, like you said, their social emotional needs, they have never been into a classroom before. They've never been into a preschool. I think that we've talked about that. The kids today are so different from what they were when they were coming in previously. And so these teachers that are trying to corral and teach and actually just get the classroom quiet for 26 students, and I know that is a huge bonus for where we were, but I still think 26 kids in a classroom for one teacher, when we went to full-day kindergarten, that's a long day for one teacher to have 26 kids who, some of them have never been in a classroom. They're still wetting their pants. They're still doing lots of things with one adult in the classroom. My daughter's in a class right now in preschool with 8 staff per one student, and I know we're never going to get there. But I just want to continue to advocate for these little kids. When we talk about the third grade reading bill, as many issues are with that third grade reading bill, the point of it was to have kids reading by third and fourth grade. Is the intent of it was to make sure we are teaching kids as they are moving along. And so one of the things that we can do, I think, as a board and prioritize as a board, is as these students are coming in, we will need to pull them out less if we train them in kindergarten and use our money wisely in kindergarten and first grade. And I think that we've done that with a lot of things that we put in place. But again, I just want to advocate for a parapro that is in that classroom. I just talked to an Oakland County Teacher of the Year, and she's a kindergarten teacher, and she had between 21 and 23 kids in her classroom. And I just think when we have 26 kids, it's better than it used to be, but 26 kids in a class is still a lot of kids for one teacher to manage. And the way that we have our classroom structured with literacy time, and the teachers are pulling 4 kids out to read to them, that is still 22 5-year-olds that are all by themselves in a classroom that are supposed to be reading and doing things on their own. And kindergartners. That's a lot of kids in a classroom. So I appreciate the 10 days that we gave the teachers, but I cannot advocate enough for finding that balance somewhere, not full-time parapros. I understand that we are not in that position, but a balance somewhere of providing more support to the kindergarten teachers where you're not having to pull these kids out, but they're in their classroom. I think that one of the things that I've heard consistently is the relational aspect of kids, of these little ones. They learn better when they're more comfortable in an environment. I just talked to a principal who said, we actually don't switch for social studies. We don't switch. I want to keep the kids the same because they learn better when they have a familiarity and a relationship with the teacher. If you have a relationship with a parapro, if somebody is going with those kids to a lunchroom, we talk about increasing anxiety in schools. When you send these little 5-year-olds off to a lunchroom all by themselves with no one, with no parapro, with no one, they have a custodian who is in there who does a great job, but who they don't know, and they're trying to, it's just creating more difficulty for these little ones. So that's just where I am sitting. I think that that literacy coaches have done a phenomenal job in our district, but I've talked to a couple teachers who say, I just can't implement what the literacy coaches are teaching because I have 26 5-year-olds that I'm trying to manage and corral. And I think, again, we don't need full-time parapros. We just need more assistance in those kindergarten classrooms to set us up for first grade, second grade, and third grade. They're not typically wetting their pants, or they still don't know when they're going to get sick in the middle of the classroom, and so you have more instances of kids getting sick and the teacher having to take the kids out. So I think all of those instances are just reasons that we as a board need to prioritize somehow finding the funds without dipping into our fund balance, because we still need to have a healthy fund balance, but trying to find somewhere to put more support in that first touch point of our kids that come into our district that we're going to have for the next 13 years, to find something that we can do to help the teachers to be able to teach the kids and be effective in their classroom.
So I wanted to let you know, Mrs. Frank, we did have some follow-up dialogue on that topic, because we had some great conversation from multiple board members that had asked about, cost related to full-time support in the kindergarten classrooms, and then we talked about the potential of adding days or adding a bank of days. And once we have a better opportunity to take a look at our days going forward and our costs going forward, it's certainly something we can revisit. At this point, we were moving forward with the recommendations that we had, especially as we had that eye looking forward to the following year. We wanted to really look at sustainability, but we definitely did take a look at whether or not there could be additional days perhaps added to a bank that teachers could access.
Yes.
It's something, so once we get the data back from our schools where we do our differentiation chart
Yes.
and determine where the need exists, that may also be a way we may look to consider adding some additional days as we move forward.
Well, thank you. I think that means it's my turn. Many substantial services and targeted initiatives are part and parcel of the recommended budget for the secondary level. Let's review the presentation slides. This past school year, and our recommendation extends into the 2018-19 school year, is for an increase of 1.5 FTE to support full-time positions of the student assistance provider at the high schools and a 0.5 position at the middle schools. The SAP position, the student assistance provider position, enhances our counseling services for students with social and emotional concerns, issues of anxiety, substance abuse, addictions, grief counseling, and much, much more. During the 2017-18 school year, the county enhancement millage allows us to put a 4.0 FTEs into school-based proposals for direct student support for students that needed a special focused lift, if you will. For the 2018-19 school year, we are recommending an increase of 1.7 FTEs for a total of 5.7 toward that effort. This staffing enhancement allows schools to run targeted initiatives, such as, and for example, the freshman transitions program at Franklin High School, where 18 of 30 students showed at least one grade level of reading growth in the iReady testing during first semester. The Math ELA drop-in lab at Churchill, which saw to date over 410 students take advantage of teacher tutorial assistance during their lunch period. The math skills classes at Stevenson High School to support students identified as needing extra help, of which there have been now 0 failing grades in those Algebra 1 and Algebra 2 classes. Emerson Middle School offers ELA, English Language Arts Enrichment sections, which has increased reading grade level on average of 1.4 years as measured by the Gates McGinnity test. Frost Middle School offers math connection classes, which are double dip math classes, which has improved assignment completion rates, and for at least 50% of the students, their overall grades in math have risen from the D&E range into the B level range. And Holmes Middle School offers academic support classes, which resulted in 0 failure grades for the 7th graders enrolled during first semester, and across the board, improved grades in core subject for 8th graders compared to their 7th grade grades. In addition, we're recommending an increase of 4.7 balancing staffing to provide lower class sizes in critical areas where performance grouping has been eliminated, where we can provide special leadership staffing for our magnet programs such as math, science, and computers at Churchill Kappa and the IB program at Franklin. Our counseling department at the high schools have been allocated balancing for special assignments and responsibilities. There's balancing for online credit recovery courses at the high school. And balancing has been provided to the Career Center to maximize their course offerings. At the PAC, we're excited to that our PACs, our Performing Arts Centers, are almost all up and running, but 2 of the 3 schools are. This year, we put in a .2 staffing in each of those high schools, Franklin and Stevenson, to make sure those areas are properly inventoried and maintained. And we'd like to add that to Churchill next year. So we're looking at throwing staffing, continuing and enhancing the staffing for those theater and tech classes, which also builds a cadre of students who know how to operate those facilities, which are much more complicated than what we knew with our old auditoriums. Much more digital and much more involved lighting and audio configurations. Also, for the PAC, we're looking to add part-time managers at each of the schools. And that again would help us maintain the beauty and the functionality, the inventory. Someone who really owns that and is dedicated to making that place shine and keeping it brand new for the next generation, if you will. I want to emphasize, as Ms. Scott did with the elementary, when we piece this all together to high school level, the staffing allocation is over and above contract provisions by 22.5 FTEs. In addition, on the next slide, I'll note the renovations to our athletic fields, which are underway and taking place. And this summer, we're going to, install a new football field with a D zone at Churchill, nicely colored with school logos, in concrete, redoing of the concrete and asphalt work. The baseball infields would be turfed. The softball outfields would be turfed. So a lot of enhancements on our athletic fields. In addition,
Mr. Willenberg, I'm just going to pop in for just one moment for our community members that are listening. So those additions and those renovations are covered and paid for out of our sinking fund. These are not general fund dollars or Wayne County Enhancement Millage dollars. So certainly a very important aspect, but we're utilizing our sinking fund dollars to do those renovations at the athletic fields both this summer and next summer. So again, those are not funds which can be utilized for classroom support, academic support, staffing, et cetera.
Thank you for that clarification.
Sure.
Important clarification. Also, as we've shared earlier this spring and earlier in the winter, we do plan on adding bowling, boys and girls bowling at each, varsity bowling at each high school, which is a total of 6 teams that will take place during the winter season next school year. In addition, we plan on adding lacrosse. Right now, we're looking at a unified boys team and a unified girls team to represent the Livonia Public Schools. Our numbers have come in pretty strong through our intent to play meetings, and certainly there's still on the table is that possibility of adding a unified JV team or something more at each high school. So there's a lot of exciting investments into the secondary programs offered for your consideration.
In the Academic Services Department. Yep. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mrs. Burton,
A quick
please.
question. Mr. Willenberg, you mentioned performance grouping when you were talking about the 4.7 balancing FTEs. Can you tell us what performance grouping is?
It refers to tracking. When you track a student, you pull them out and put them in a separate group, if you will.
Okay.
And our philosophy, our belief, to an extent, is that that can have harmful effects as well. So we're moving away, from that performance grouping and putting those students in, not just within students of their own ability, but students with who would challenge them, and and it'll create a more challenging and rigorous academic environment for those students.
We
And we're
refer to them as
recognizing-
B-level classes.
That's right, I figured you were
And so
talking,
those
okay.
are being phased out.
Okay. And are we saying then by adding additional staff, we're able to lower class size enough, by a few here and there in order to make that work?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, that's been a significant commitment with the balancing staff, is for the schools that have taken that on and made that transition, knowing that there may be students with some additional needs coming into the classroom.
Right.
Although there's certainly an abundance of research supporting that, and the district is certainly supporting that. We also know that in order to help that transition be successful, we've allocated additional balancing staff where those transitions are taking place.
Okay, great. And then my other comment is just, again, we've had study session time to discuss it, but I wanted, while we have an opportunity on air, to thank Mr. Archibald, Mr. Willenborg, the Athletic Council, and numerous other administrators, and a whole lot of parent advocates who, for many, many years, probably as long as I've been on the board, have been advocating for us to add specifically bowling. Lacrosse has come up many of those years, a lot of requests to add opportunities for our students to be involved in their schools. And we know that students do better when they are involved in some type of outside the classroom extracurricular activity, whether it's a club or a team or a choir or whatever it might be. But thank you very much. We finally are seeing some dollars that we're able to use on a little bit more of a discretionary method. And thank you so much for allowing these teams to come in and allowing some of these students who may not otherwise have an opportunity to participate in an area that they're comfortable in to do so. So I'm thrilled. Thank you.
Okay. So the Academic Services Department. So as you know, last year, we budgeted to increase our textbook replacement budget, and we had been for more than 10 years having a minimal to zero textbook replacement budget. So this first year, we have had several textbook adoption committees running, and some will run over into next year. We've brought to you, and this evening we'll be bringing high school statistics to you, but we've spent approximately $500,000. We anticipate 4 of our committees rolling over into next year, and they'll be continuing to pilot materials, plus our already anticipated committees looking at new books. So these are the courses. So 36 courses or grade levels will be touched with the Wayne County Enhancement Millage money. Updating curriculum, the assessments, the materials that students are using. So we are thankful and appreciative and looking forward to continuing this work over the next 2 years. As Mrs. Frank brought up earlier, we did ask for 3 literacy coaches this year, 3 coaches over 11 of our K-4 buildings. They started the year off building relationships. 2 of our coaches were hired from outside the district. Building teachers' understanding of what coaching looks like, what job-embedded professional development looks like, feels like, how to look at their student data a little bit differently, and then how to plan around that. And we are coming to you asking for 2 additional literacy coaches so that these coaches have a focus on less classrooms. So currently they're assigned to anywhere from 58 to 65 classrooms, teachers that they work with, and they serve either 3 or 4 buildings. So adding 2 more elementary literacy coaches would allow them to be at 2 buildings. 1 person would be possibly at 3 with adding Webster this year. And then it would give them that time to be in the building so teachers could build that relationship, stop and see the coaches more often, and the coaches be in the classroom. We would also are advocating for 3 instructional coaches for upper elementary. Our model would be the same as a literacy coach, but because our 5-6 teachers are content-driven and some more focused on math, science, and social studies, we want to take the model that we've been working in literacy and expand it to all content areas. So working with our 5-6 teachers in any content area and helping them, again, to dig into their student data, look at an area that they want to set some goals and set some planning around that, and then implement those plans with the teacher. And then lastly, we would like to add an additional coordinator to the Academic Services Department. We are working on a job description that incorporates the use of technology. So all of our buildings will have been renovated and have our updated technology. So not just knowing how to use the projectors and the document cameras and Chromebooks, but how to actually engage and enhance the educational experience of our students in our classrooms. And so we would like to have a coordinator to be able to build what that would look like, that curriculum, beginning with 5th through 12th grade. So focusing on our secondary, our upper elementary and our secondary classrooms, how they can use technology to enhance and improve our student learning. Good.
Good. Wonderful. Thank you. Good evening. I'm very excited to present the Student Services recommendations. As you can see in the first bullet point, an additional 3 FTEs of resource program special education supports were provided to lower caseload sizes in 2 of our K-4 buildings and 1 of our 5-6 buildings last year, and we would look to continue providing that additional FTE as we go look through all of our buildings and see which buildings continue to require additional supports. Those 3 FTEs were located at Randolph and Kennedy, which received students from Garfield, and then at the Cooper Upper Elementary, where the building required additional supports. We are looking to continue to provide an additional 4.0 FTE through 31A. As you know, special education staff are funded through special education funds such as IDEA, and if they are funded 100% through IDEA, then they are required to work solely with students with IEPs. So if we give a percentage, either 10% or 20%, depending on the needs and the size of the building, to special education resource providers or to our speech and language therapists, this allows our highly qualified special education staff who are trained specifically in providing direct reading instruction and direct communication skills, can provide that staff to our at-risk general education students as well to support learning interventions building-wide. So we have additional 2.1 of our special education resource program staff and an additional 1.9 of our speech and language therapists in K-6. I am pleased to recommend to you a behavior and trauma-informed care specialist. Our district has seen an increase in the social-emotional needs of our students that require direct staff intervention by an EST, by an ESAP, or by our psychologists and social workers. So we have had 91 reported cases of threatening behavior, for example, and then in a period of 4 years, the number went up to 154. So we are seeing students who are more in crisis, who have experienced trauma than we've seen before. This person would support all K-12 buildings. This individual would support buildings that had students that required functional behavior assessments and behavior intervention plans. They would train all staff in trauma-informed care, positive behavior supports, and restorative practices. This staff would be a major part of our behavior response team, which supports teachers, administration, and systems to be able to work with any students in crisis. So this is all students K-12. This person would be able to go specifically to a building to support a student in the classroom to provide direct training to the teacher or paraprofessional in best practices to have that child remain in class receiving their instruction from their highly qualified general education teacher. Also looking to recommend a 0.5 FTE of a teacher leader in our early childhood program. So as you know, at Jackson Center, we provide special education services for students who are 2 years, 9 months, up to kindergarten age. We also have an obligation of child find in which any student can come to us and request an evaluation to determine whether or not their student qualifies for special education services. So in our early childhood program, we have approximately 160 students in our program. And students come to us at many points throughout the year. As soon as they are turning 3 years old, they leave their early on program and they come to Jackson Center. That requires a transition meeting and it requires an IEP before their 3rd birthday, which requires placement decisions. We also provide the most evaluations in that building at over 110 throughout the year. This person would provide support for those transition meetings, provide support for the IEP teams, and then help the parents and the IEP team make the recommendations of placements for their young child. Lastly, Snap and Read would be a continuation. As you know, this is our 3rd year of Snap and Read. Snap and Read is a Google extension that all students, K-12, have access to in our district. Students can access this program whether they're online or offline, as long as they are logging on to a Google computer that with their @Livonia Public Schools email address. Snap and Read is a program that is a dynamic text leveler, so it will read any type of text. It will read regular text in Word documents, it will read PDFs, it will read JPEGs and websites, and if the student is at a lower reading level, Snap and Read can actually lower the reading level so that the student can read the material and understand any type of text. It will also translate any type of text into one of 114 different languages. Co-Writer would be the newest Google extension that works hand in hand with Snap and Read, so you could have both extensions open at the same time. So Co-Writer, is a bibliographer, a word prediction tool, a study tool, and an outline paper tool. Students can place a topic, for example, into Co-Writer, so they can say they want to write about Lake Michigan. And then Co-Writer is a word prediction tool. So Co-Writer will predict the most commonly used words in writing when a student would be writing about Lake Michigan. So that if a student struggles with vocabulary, as they're typing, the words will be predicted on the screen so that the student can pick from words as they're writing text. It also allows teachers to be able to look at their students' data. So teachers can go on and look at the number of words read for every single student in their class, as well as the number of words written by every single student in their class when they are looking at progress monitoring. So this would be an additional 3 years of Snap and Read along with Co-Writer for all students K-12.
Mrs. Burton.
Can you remind me what RCR stands for?
RCR is the resource provider, so it's a special education resource provider. So those are our special education teachers located in all of our buildings across the district for our general education students who require special education supports.
Okay. So those funds you said are paid, or those positions are paid for out of our 31A funds?
A part of their salary, so either 10% or 20% of their full-time equivalency would be paid out of 31A. That allows our special education providers the opportunity to then work with general ed at-risk students.
Okay. Our ECP, the halftime ECP, what funding is that going to be coming from? Do we know?
That is out of the local budget?
General fund.
General fund? Okay. And then the 2 literacy coaches, the 3 instructional coaches, and the 1 behavioral specialist. Are those general fund supports?
So, well, let me go back to each of those. So the literacy coaches, we have 1 that's currently funded out of a grant.
Okay.
And then we have 2 that are funded out of our enhancement millage. And the combination of the literacy coaches and the instructional coaches. We're going to continue to apply for any grant funds that may be available through the state, although they are quite limited.
Right.
And so we will have a balance of that. The primary funding for that will come from the enhancement millage. If we are able to utilize any of our 31A funding for that, we would continue to do so.
Okay.
And then what was the other
The
position?
behavioral specialist?
That will come from the enhancement millage.
Okay. And then that leads me to my next question. If a lot of these are coming from our enhancement millage, I know we like to make, well, not like, we do, but make long-term commitments to our staff. What is our thought and plan should the enhancement millage not pass a few years from now when it is up for renewal? Because it is tenuous.
Right. So we initially made a 3-year commitment for the majority of these pieces. Again, some of the, the textbooks are adjusted a bit here and there. But what we had talked about last year when we first put these plans in place was that it would certainly not be appropriate to put plans in place for a year and then pull that support away. However, to say it would be in place for all 6 years may not be appropriate as well. So Mr. Willenberg gave you a snapshot of some of the data that we're collecting. So we'll continue to do that after this year, year 1, year 2, and year 3. Before we make any recommendations moving forward into years 4, 5, and 6, we'll reevaluate these pieces for their effectiveness and their impact and their sustainability within our budget.
Okay. And would these positions fall under our teacher contracts, or are they different?
So the literacy coaches and the instructional coaches are within our they're within our teacher contract.
Okay.
I'm trying to pull these other pieces. Same with the teacher leader position, the resource room teachers. I'm trying to see if there's anything else that I didn't cover.
Behavioral specialist.
Coordinator.
The coordinator is would be part of the LEADS organization.
Okay.
The academic services coordinator. Did you cover them all?
The behavior
positions are
specialist.
ASME.
Custodial positions are AFSCME.
Hey, don't be surprised at them.
You see some of those in the operations slide.
Okay. That gives me a ballpark of what we're looking at. Okay, great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And
Try to edit that out.
Mrs. Frank?
The instructional leaders for 5-6 building, right? 5-6. That is one per building or not necessarily? One per 5-6 building?
One of them may share with Webster,
Okay.
so we're figuring that out.
Okay. Okay, I think I'm done. Okay, I had another one, but I lost it, so I didn't write it down. Okay, I'll come back to one.
Okay. Anybody else questions before we move on to operations?
Thank you very much. Surprisingly, there's an additional 2.0 FTE for custodial staff. What we are proposing here is to add two FTE, which would be 2 full custodians, but not necessarily a whole body in a building and a whole body in a building. That would more than likely be split up to cover several buildings in order to fully staff the evening cleanings, et cetera. With the combination of buildings over the past year, we have found a need for additional help on the, as Mr. Archibald said, it's an AFSCME position in the custodial realm with regard to more use of buildings that may not have used and utilized all of its space in the past, or all of its classrooms now are utilizing all of their classrooms in all of their spaces. So that, I couldn't tell you specifically where those folks would end up, because what we want to do is, if the board does approve this, then sit down and evaluate all of our staff and how we would schedule and staff our buildings for the 18-19 school year. The second bullet is 1.0 to 2.0 FTE IT system administrator or now analyst. So what we're looking at here is the IT department, along and in conjunction with HR, worked together to look at what types of work was needed to continually maintain our systems, not only as they are, but rather to be moving them forward in the information technology world. As an example, a move from the current operating system of Windows 7 to the operating system of Windows 10. And there are many items like that that take extensive work, planning, and preparation along with teamwork amongst several members of the IT department. And what was determined is that we needed more person power to be able to do that appropriately. So after putting our heads together between IT and operations and human resources and crunching the numbers of what would happen if we had an outside company do this versus what if we had our own people who are qualified with network and systems work to be able to help shepherd the district through those types of changes that are currently undergoing and we foresee occurring over the next couple of years. We found that it was actually much more to our advantage to have our own people doing it, because as opposed to saying, company ABC consultant to come in and we'll pay you X for these many hours, we could have a full person working more hours on more of our information technology concerns. So that's what you're seeing there. The titles we have sort of floating right now simply because we know that we need people who have so much of the new technology that came from the 2013 bond has been put onto the district's network. So as opposed to a standalone printer, which was more common for many, many years, now the new multifunction printers and copiers are on our network. Our PAs and alarms are on our network. So much of what we have is on the district network. We need folks that go beyond just the tweaking and work of a singular item, but have systems, group policy, and network background. That's what we're looking for to bring in to work on the team. So we have a network administrator in the department. We need some folks that might fall perhaps under that, but above what a traditional technician who would just work on an individual item would be. So hence the title is there. Yes.
So I just want to build on what Mr. Francis shared. Specifically, in these two departments were significantly impacted during the reductions over a number of years. Not that every department at some point was not, but as you may recall, the district made a clear commitment to maintaining programs and people in classrooms for our students. So these are two areas which were very significantly impacted, and over time, you begin to see that impact. Specifically with regarding IT, we have had, as people have moved into other positions, either in other districts or retired, et cetera, the majority of those positions were not replaced over the past number of years. However, we have increased our technology in the district exponentially since the bond. So whether it's handheld devices like our Chromebooks, in addition to the technology we've added to over 900 classrooms, what we have seen is the impact of less staff and significantly more and more complex technology. And so although the needs probably are far greater than what we're recommending, we certainly think this will continue to move us forward and be able to support this technology that we've invested in within the district.
Mrs. Frank. I think, too, we noted in the study session that, like you said, the needs were far greater than what you put here, but I think especially when the community entrusted us with the bonds and we improved all of our schools and we not added on to every school, but updated the schools. So to invest in this is a big investment in our investment. And so I think to take care of it is being wise financial stewards of the money that the city and the taxpayers have given to us, because we want to take care of what we just built in the newness that we have.
Yes, this would slightly increase and make our ratio of technicians to devices a little bit better, because it would bring on a couple more people. Any other items or other questions on that? The only other item,
Go ahead.
As the only other item that other bullet I have is the bus and maintenance vehicle replacement. This is mentioned earlier by Mrs. Oquist, but the board has approved this year to replace several buses and several maintenance vehicles, which have become, we'll say, long in the tooth and not much longer for this world. We have this on here for next year as well to keep reviewing our fleets and making necessary replacements of our oldest vehicles as needed. One of the wiser ideas is to, even though we bought many buses at one time with actually we staged it out over a few purchases, but with the 2013 bond, we did not replace every bus in our fleet. And I want to be clear to the community that while we bought many buses, we have many, many buses still that are from the early 2000s, mid 2000s, and 2000 up to 2009, et cetera. So what we want to do is do those in stages, is do the replacements a little bit each year, much like Mrs. O'Brien was talking about getting textbooks a little bit each year. Same idea.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good? Okay.
This is quick. This is just a placeholder in there. We've been reviewing, looking at a integrated software platform for HR and finance, and so we'll continue our work on that. We do have a system currently. We pay for the use of Wayne Reese's system, and they've put a lot of resources into that system over the last several months to beef it up and to make it more of an integrated HR and finance system. And so we continue to learn their enhancements and to see how well that platform works for us, but then also exploring other platforms as well. So.
Any questions for Mr.
Okay, and so I'll just briefly cover Mrs. Jenkins' part, who stuck with us last week. As you know, and you can see even as you look at some of our screens down in the boardroom, we are working with relatively antiquated equipment, not only on our production equipment as we record and broadcast our meetings or other events that may take place. One of the challenges is also that the mechanisms up in our tech area are significantly outdated, and that is those servers communicate with our local cable providers to be able to broadcast out our meetings and other programming, affectionately known. It used to be Channel 15, now it's Channel 215, and I believe Channel 19 in Westland, and on WOW. And so we're looking, we've allocated approximately $50,000 to update our video production equipment. So that will not only assist us as we look to record and broadcast meetings, but as we also, as we continue to do feature videos across the district of our schools and of our programs, and then broadcast that out for our community on our cable channel. So we are really at end of life with much of that equipment. This is a relatively small expenditure that we're setting aside, but we believe it will be an important impact for us.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, with that, we'll flip back to the budget. So we've talked about a lot of additions, and I want to show you how this will impact our 2018-19 proposed budget. The first thing I want to mention, when we look at the 17-18 school year and where we anticipate ending at the $19.9 million, that does include a portion that is assigned fund balance. So those are purchases that have been approved by the board this school year that will not be purchased and received before June 30th. The largest of which, the school bus purchase, the 9 school buses, that's about $750,000 worth of that fund balance that's assigned for that purchase, and that will be coming out of the 2018-19 budgets. Another example would be the textbooks that we've approved this year, but that we aren't going to be receiving before June 30th. So that will be assigned and coming out of the 2018-19 budget.
And Mrs. Smith, I think we talked about this last week as well on some of the future updates that you give us. That's going to be called out.
Yep.
So that we understand that our, even though we're starting the year with $19.9 million, it's, some of that's already been spent on purchases, and it's a carryover from this year.
Exactly,
Okay.
yeah. We've made a note on the slide, but you'll also see that in our financial statements. When you do see that ending fund balance, that it'll clearly be spelled out that a portion of that is assigned.
Okay,
So
thank you.
we'll see that in multiple spots, just so that everyone is clear on that.
Thank you.
So looking at the 18-19 budget, we're going to start the year, we hope, with a $19.9 million beginning fund balance. The revenues, $154.2 million. Expenditures of $155.3 million, which would leave us an ending fund balance of $18.8 million, or 12.21%. In the board packet is also a detailed budget book, so we could flip there to go into a little additional detail, and then we'll come back to the presentation. So our projected revenues for the 2018-19 school year are $1.1 million less than what we anticipate collecting in the 2017-18 school year. The two main categories of change are the state and other financing sources. On the state side, the largest decrease we're seeing is one of the 147C2 lines for the MIPSR's retirement. This year we received $2.2 million worth of revenue from the state. That also then had to be recorded on the expense side as a $2.2 million expenditure. So luckily with that decrease in state aid, we also are able to recognize a decrease in retirement expenses for that line item. The other change too in our proposed budget is the sale of property. We entered into some agreements this school year that won't close before June 30th, the largest clay. So we are including that in our 2018-19 school year. With that, I will flip to the next page.
So it's still, the MIPSR's is still a wash? Is that right?
It's surprising, we have actually 4 lines of MIPSR's funding, and so for this particular funding, I referenced the $2.2 million, that is a wash. It'll be a decrease of $2.2 million on the revenue side and a decrease of $2.2 million on the expenditure side. Overall, the retirement rate is going up next year, and it doesn't look like much. You know, you're talking from on the regular retirement of maybe 25.2% to 25.4%. But because such a large portion of our budget are salaries, that equates to almost $1 million of additional retirement cost.
So that is not a wash. That isn't the flow through in and out.
Mm-hmm.
Those are additional expenditures that the district has to take on next year.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of the wash, we're very excited to see in all of the proposals from the state an increase in state funding. For Livonia, it looks to be $120 per pupil. But unfortunately, because we're anticipating declining enrollment, about 175 kids, we were down about 170 this fall. The net increase to us in additional foundation allowance is about $250,000. So not enough to cover the additional retirement expense. So that's something we'll see on the next slide, the retirement expenses reflected. So on the next slide, you'll see a detailed breakdown of our expenditures, and the expenditures net are up $3.2 million for next year for 18-19. So a number of things included here. Year 2 of our union contracts are going into effect in 18-19. Insurance costs increase. We've gotten some pretty large increases on our group life insurance and also our long-term disability. And we're going to have some increases, we know, too, on the health insurance side. So those are some increases. This budget also reflects the increases due to the added supports we just went through on the PowerPoint slide. One note or change of note, too, is also the athletics program. So we're continually looking at our books and wanting to make them as compliant with the state accounting manual as possible. And I want to be very clear that we always have been. If we weren't, that would be something that the auditors would call out, and that would be included in their findings, their report to us. But we've internally kept some accounts separate. So one of the things that I'm recommending is that the athletic fund, which doesn't qualify anymore for standalone status, that we do incorporate that into the general fund. So you'll see the athletic funds or athletic expenditures are listed under support services, about $2.1 million. Luckily, on the revenue side, we are now going to be recording the pay-to-participate fees as revenues, as well as the gate receipts in the general fund. And one expenditure you'll see go down is under the other financing sources. There's a line called transfer to other funds. We no longer have to do a general fund transfer to the athletic fund because we're recording these expenditures here. The other change in the transfer to the other funds too is in the proposed budget, we haven't included any transfers to the capital projects fund because we were able to move some money around in 17-18. I'm not including that in the 18-19 proposed budget. We can always discuss that too once our final audit is complete or during our next amendment. But for this budget, we did not include that. One thing I did want to mention, I forgot on the revenue side, I did want to make clear that I've included the Wayne Risa Special Education Transportation Payment, which is just under $800,000. The county continues to refer to that as a one-time payment. They don't want to commit to it for multiple years. But based on the budget that we saw for their Act 18 program, we think that that's very likely that they'll continue that. So that has been included in the proposed budget. So should something change, we'll bring that update to the board. But that has been included in our proposed budget.
Mrs. Burton?
Mrs. Smith, the athletics, we'll still be able to identify that if we're looking for those dollars. We will just find them in a different area of the budget.
Yep.
Thank you.
Everything you see on the in this budget book is in the format of the state accounting codes. So these are by function breakdown, and that's what the state recommends. So that's how we have our budget presented here. So the athletics fund is listed under the support services, and we'd see the local revenue increase for those gate receipts and the pay to participate fees.
Thank you.
Mr. Centers?
Just looking at the amended 2017-18 and the proposed 2018-19, the resolution for adoption there. Athletics, I do see the expenditure. What was our revenue in the 2017-18 year for athletics?
Roughly $1 million from gate receipts and the pay to participate fees,
Okay.
and the rest is supplemented by the general fund.
Right, okay.
And that's very much on par with our surrounding districts.
Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Frank?
Can you say that again?
Sure.
This was for 16,
For 17-18, for this current year, about $1 million worth of revenue was brought in between gate receipts and pay to participate fees, and the rest of the revenue came from the general fund as a transfer to the athletic fund to cover the expenditures. And in comparison, we look at it as a percentage of the general fund. How much are we spending out of our general fund for the athletic program? And that's what I compare then to the other districts, because other districts have different, size budgets and athletic programs. But we are, as far as the percentage goes, very much on par with our neighbors on what we spend for the athletics. And that was actually one of the reasons why the athletic fund is no longer in the state's eyes as a standalone fund, because it's no longer self-sustaining, and that's one of the requirements to be a fund, is that it be self-sustaining. So that's why the state recommended moving it to the general fund.
Questions? Mrs. Bradford?
I just want to commend the cabinet for all of their hard work on the capturing the budget and working on such a, I am a little nervous after I agree with Mr. Johnson and Mrs. Burton with that Wayne County Enhancement Millage ending in the next few years. Just to take a look at, it makes me a little nervous on how we're moving forward, but I think you captured, every group captured a little something to try to enhance things. But I just want the public to know that, we are, it does look on paper like we have a large fund balance, and that, but it is a little unnerving to know that as we're moving forward, some of these programs that we're putting in place, we may have to adjust or change due to our financial stability. And I know we're looking ahead, we talked about that, but it does make me very nervous, especially with the upcoming teacher contracts and negotiations, what that's going to look like in another year, and how that's going to factor into our finances, and also the loss of the Wayne County Enhancement Millage if we aren't able to generate. I think Dan hit the nail on the head. The state really needs to step up, and after listening to what the per pupil increase and then our decreasing enrollment, that's really disheartening to hear that we aren't going to be capturing a lot of additional monies for our students. So I think it's really important that we continue with our legislators to let them know that we still, we need them to increase funding, or we need to have some type of a plan moving forward, because we're doing the best we can, but it does make me a little bit nervous as we move ahead in the next few years as to what that's going to look like. But thank you. I think this is, I have to agree with my cohort here about the little ones down in the kindergarten rooms when they're coming in. I do think that we need, I wish, it would be my wish, is to make sure that we can get more additional staffing in those lower grades to get the numbers down, because I do think as far as gaining literacy and making great strides, if we don't capture them down in kindergarten and first and second grade as they move along, it's so much harder for these older students to catch up a grade level or two in 1 year. And I too would like to see, in a perfect world, more additional support down in those younger, lower grades. But I know you did a great job putting it together and getting the most out of what we have. But I think that it is difficult. I think it's going to be hard to see. Hopefully, we're going to see improvements. I hope we see improvements as we move along, but I think we have to really continue to advocate at the state level for additional funding.
Mr. Centers?
Not to get too much on soapbox, but state revenue surplus came in over $100 million better than expected. And they're saying that that revenue is for urgent needs. Well, we have urgent needs here in our school district, so that would really go a long way to helping our schools.
And really, that's a collective effort. Certainly, as a school district, I think our board, and just last week, Mrs. O'Brien and Mrs. Smith and I met with our state representative to review the budget and to advocate strongly for our per pupil funding, our 31A at-risk funding, but it really is the responsibility of every single member of our school community. So from our staff to our parents, to each of us around this table, that's a continual dialogue that we need to press and continue to move forward.
Mrs. Frame. On that note, there is legislation currently, I think, for additional counselors because of some of the school violence that has happened. Do you see that actually coming to fruition? I know we can't count on it, but also I think additional funding for some security. That would definitely help our budget. Do you see that coming to fruition, or it's so early to, it's hard to tell?
It's so hard to say. I think there's certainly momentum, and as at the revenue generating conference, we did see a healthier balance in not only the general fund, but in the school aid budget. So while I think the legislature is looking to earmark some of that for things like roads, et cetera, at least that's what we've heard. The one area of education where I have heard a focus is on school safety. What I will say is I spent quite a bit of time last week reviewing each of the school safety bills and the legislation related to that. Without going into a lot of detail, many of them are either grant-based or based on creating committees at the statewide level that would include additional reporting requirements that are pretty significant from our districts. So what, as a district, we're looking for is boots on the ground, real person support. So whether that's mental health support, whether that's, as you know, we pay for our school resource officers, our Blue Line officers, our administrator of public safety, and we put $1 million of expenditures just toward pure safety-related personnel in our district. And so any of those dollars that could offset that would absolutely help with our general fund. So we are looking for that boots on the ground support as opposed to having to put those monies toward additional data collection or that type of information. So there's a bit of a mix in the bills that we've seen. There are a number of them out there. So any that you see that get behind providing additional resources for districts, for school safety personnel, we would certainly support.
Thank you.
Okay, I have a question, or maybe if you can help us out with this. So, I'm coming to my end of life with my students in LPS, and almost the entire time that I've had kids in school, we have been in this recession. And so I think a lot of us are what's happening in the last 10 years has been the status quo. So no textbooks, no buses, I wrote a couple other things down. Vehicles, athletic fields. All of a sudden now we're spending a lot of money on some of these items. And Mrs. O'Quist or Mrs. Smith, I don't know who would address this, but, and I think in the future we've got technology that, can you talk a little bit about replacement cycles and how we have been out of these replacement cycles, that there are a lot of things that we're replacing that are literally at end of life, and how we need to get back into that, and why it's prudent to have a replacement cycle? Does that kind of make sense?
Sure. I can start that off, and then if you want to pick up from there. Really, two of the sources for that. One was the $195 million bond. So that allowed us to move forward with purchase of buses, purchase of many of those capital improvements, the technology, et cetera, that we would not have been able to do otherwise. The sinking fund allows us to pick up some of those other costs, and then certainly, as we mentioned in the beginning, the Wayne County Enhancement Millage. So those three funding sources allow us to utilize funds outside of the general fund, because as you know, that has remained rather stagnant. If anything, we are just now stabilizing that, as opposed to seeing a continual decline, which we had experienced for a number of years. And so certainly what we're trying to do at this point in time is utilize those funds for more significant size replacement, for instance, the buses, to purchase 66 buses over the first 3 years of the bond, brought us quite a bit ways of what if we have a fleet of 110. And so now we're really to the point of, as we mentioned to the board earlier this year, we'd like to get to the point where we're purchasing 6, 7, 8 buses a year. So one, they don't all come to end of life at the same time, but number two, so we can continue to keep our fleet updated, so you avoid some of those more significant maintenance costs and ongoing issues related to that. And so that is another piece as you talk about the long-term budget planning. We are very desirous of continuing on that textbook replacement cycle, bus and vehicle replacement cycle. We'll do that certainly at lesser levels than we've been able to do with this infusion of the bond or of the enhancement millage. But we'd like to continue that moving forward, which is another reason why having a strong fund balance is an important element.
Yes, just to piggyback on that, we're very excited to be in this position where we can start talking about these things. And rightfully so, for the last decade, we've put all this stuff on hold, and we do want to get ourselves back into a position where we don't have to make such large purchases in 1 year. So we do want to come up with a multi-year plan, and we were just talking today about the textbooks, and okay, we have to have the list of all of the textbooks in our district and what years they were acquired, so that we can then come up with our plan. So we are very excited to be in that position, and that is definitely the direction that we're going, that we're going to be forward thinking, and so that we can bring sound financial budget recommendations to you. And that's one thing too, as we talk about the additions that we went over tonight, we want you to know that we are very cognizant of the costs that we're putting into place now, and that we won't ever recommend a budget that we don't feel comfortable and we don't think is sustainable, and that as we have these added supports in place, we'll continue to look at the costs that we do have from year to year, to look at things that we may be able to pull back on in these certain areas, so that we can continue on with maybe some of these things that we've discussed tonight. So that's something we'll continue to work on and continue to get your feedback on and present to you.
Other questions? Okay. How are we doing, guys? Are we through A? Are we at the end of A?
I think really,
Finished A.
I know. The rest of the budget book truly is pretty standard, nothing of significance really. The one thing I'll note, we've accounted for in the special education fund, keeping that, 1 million target fund balance, so we've adjusted the transfers accordingly. The health and welfare fund, knowing that we're going to have some increased premiums, we've adjusted there. So everything else is looking pretty standard.
Okay,
So we have our final two slides to wrap up this portion.
excellent.
We'll talk about this look down the road, and Mrs. Smith is going to take us through that. But as we mentioned to you at our study session, we felt it was not only important to take a look at how we closed out this year, what we're planning for next year, but keep one eye forward as we take a look at the following year as well.
And one thing we wanted to do for 1920 is take off right from the bat. We know that we aren't going to have the continued sale of property, most likely in 1920, that we had in 1718 and 1819. So that's $1.8 million worth of revenue coming out of our budget. So on this slide, we've taken the $1.8 million, did I say 1.8? Thank you. $1.8 million worth of revenue out of the 1920 proposed budget, and we've left the expenditures constant. And the reason we did that, we have talked about some one-time expenditures, and we know there's going to be fluctuations, but we also know that in 1819, we have an almost $1 million retirement cost increase. So just to keep it stable, we kept the expenditures what they are for the 1819 budget. So we wanted to show you what that would do to our ending fund balance in 1920. That would be $15.9 million or 10.46%. So that's something we are continually monitoring, is that bottom line and that fund balance, and making sure that we're keeping adequate savings so that we can be prepared for whatever the future holds.
So our final look, as we shared with you, commitment is really what transforms a promise into reality, as we quote Abraham Lincoln, and that's what we believe we've done for our community, for our students, for our staff, and for our schools. And what we're recommending to you this evening, we believe adheres to the priorities we've set forth when we started this effort, and that we will continue to focus on as we move forward.
Anybody else have any questions? We're good?
I have one.
Yes, Mrs. Frank.
So this is more of a statement, but I think what you started off with, President Johnson, of just where we are, and Mrs. Oak was that last slide of where we're going to be in 1920, I think is stark, because where we come out when we're listed among Wayne County schools, I think it is to have that fund balance that is not one of the lowest in the county, I think, or in the bottom half, I think is very important. And as we look at plans to put in place for our students, we want to take care of the students entrusted to us right now. And one of the things that I just talked to Mrs. Oquist about was possibly thinking about the board, and I think that this is going to be probably for a study session, to put on a study session, but to look at possibly selling another piece of property. I know that we don't want to get away from all of the property that we have. We need to maintain the future and where the future is. But if there is a piece of property, again, not from next year, because we do have some property that's coming through, but as we learned with the clay property and some other things, as we start the process, it doesn't happen that year or even the next year. And so one of the things that just when you look at the 1920 fund balance and the things that come in that we need to pay out of the fund balance, whether it be our summer, our payments that we need to make in the summer, making sure that we don't have to have a loan for those types of things, not things that we're going to sustain parapros or anything like that that's going to be a legacy cost, but something that just builds up our fund balance for making sure we have adequate funds to provide for our students, I think is a thing that we need as a district to look at. And I know that there's a study that's been done kind of laying out all of that, where our properties are and that sort of thing. But I just wanted to put it on there. We don't need to have the discussion tonight, as we have lots more to go. But I just wanted to lay that out there as we discuss our budget. That looks like something that we're going to need to look into in the future.
Mr. Johnson, President Johnson.
Thank you. The only caveat I have to that is I don't want to get into a cycle where, because we have budgetary constraints, that we're always turning to look to sell property.
Right.
Let's not forget the efficacy that in Lansing, where the funding
Right.
really should be coming from.
Right.
I agree that at some point, that's always on the horizon that you're going to look for. But I don't want to get into that pattern of when things get tight, automatically we look to sell property. I think we need to look to other sources before we do that, because once we sell property, we've already seen that. Once it's gone, it's gone.
Yeah.
And there's nothing we can do about it.
Right.
So I think we have to be very careful of going that route, although I agree that it certainly, in a pinch, and when the time is right, if there is property that, for the foreseeable future, we don't perceive that we have a need for, then I think it's fine. But I think we just have to be cautious going on that road.
Okay, my friends, this was for for committee of the whole. Are we going to do anything with this at our regular meeting?
Yeah.
You
Yep.
have to.
The final amended budget and the proposed budget will be coming to
Okay.
you for approval at the June. Is that
Perfect.
June
I will-
4th.
I will make a note of that. Thank you. So then that moves us on to B.
Yes.
So, B is,
Are you guys leaving? Everybody's leaving?
that's,
It's like rats leaving.
Changing of the guard. Collecting all the plates.
okay. So we're going to go on to B, which is the Plant Moran Cressa amendment.
Thank you very much. Tonight, we'd like to discuss with the board an amendment to the owner's representative agreement with Plant Moran Cressa. The construction time period and the scope of the work for the bond has changed since the district entered into the original agreement with Cressa. We continue to find value in the services provided by Cressa, from their ability to lock in multi-year pricing, their willingness to commit resources to our district when needed, in a variety of ways. We would like to adjust their contract to not only extend their contract for another 12 months, which would take us through December of 2019, but we'd also like to recognize the additional scope of work that they are overseeing for us since the first amendment. So the total change in contract would be $253,750, and it would extend the term of the contract by 12 months, which would take us to December of 2019. And it also recognizes roughly $190 million worth of scope of work. We have a very busy summer, as you've seen through our previous board meetings ahead of us. One thing we wanted to do was let these projects go on and then get a feel for how much money will be left. And we know that we'll have at least $2 million worth of funds remaining after the summer 2018 projects. And we're hopeful for maybe more, maybe some continued interest that we'll be able to recognize, and maybe some savings from the project. So we know that we'll have some funds available, and we will be talking with the board about what are some potential projects for the summer of 2019. But we recognize that we will be doing work in the 2019 year. So instead of bringing you, potentially 2 amendments, we wanted to take care of that once, so that this would be the final amendment to the Cressa contract.
Mr. Centers.
I would just like to say that I've been on for 4 years now, and a little over 4 years, and I have never seen an issue with the representation we've gotten from Plant Moran Cressa. It's always been excellent. I've seen what is really incalculable savings from them on when to bid things, or when the market's better, when watching for cost overruns. It's really been incredible for us, and it really created an efficient use of these tax bond dollars. For those reasons, I think it's important that we not only continue with them, but continue with a high level of support so that we can finish this off the way it's been running throughout. These projects are so important, and it's important for us to make sure they're completed and perfect, so our students have really the environment that we envisioned for them.
And I'm going to kind of take off from what you say, Mr. Centers, is that we still have work that needs to be done, and whether or not, depending on who does that, it's not going to be free. So we're extending this contract. By extending this contract, we're extending the amount that we're paying them. If we don't extend this contract, it doesn't mean that the work still isn't there and that we aren't going to have to pay someone to do it, either internally or externally. And I think for a very good price, we're purchasing extremely professional people who know what they're doing. This is their wheelhouse. And I think we have more than recouped we have a great return on investment for the amount that we're paying them. So.
We're paying approximately 1.48% on the total scope of the work. As Mrs. Smith and I had an opportunity to go back and take a look at the original proposals that you may recall back from 2013 when we first interviewed owners' reps and brought them forward, that I believe the percentages ranged anywhere from, I think, 2.4, 2.6%, all the way up to 6+%. So the 1.48% to have locked in that rate and have that remained continuous, even though the scope over which we've asked them to oversee has grown, which is a portion of the need for the amendment, from $178 million from the first amendment to $190 million. It also accounts for the extension of time. So as you may recall, we anticipated being wrapped up into the fall of 2018, so that this would be the final summer. As we extended that work a bit, as we did the district enrollment and building utilization study. And we also purposely initially put off starting the high schools by 1 year, you may recall, and each of those were 2-year projects. There was some significant cost savings in that first year because we were able to do that, but then that has extended out the contract overall so that we can continue this work. Not only with regard to bond renovation, school improvements, but also, as you had mentioned earlier, Mrs. Burton, the need to expend a certain amount of our funds before we get to the end of that cycle. And so I would certainly concur with the statements that have been made, and we really have been able to calculate millions of dollars of savings based on having the owner's rep. We'd be happy to detail that out for you, but overall, the savings have been significant.
Mrs. Jarvis, did you have a question?
I did, although much of it's been covered. There's tremendous value in sticking with an organization that has provided such expertise and such quality. And I'd like to see the continuity of our renovations continue. It would be very sad if the work toward the end wasn't at the same caliber as the work at the beginning. And I think by sticking with them, we help our students and our community to maintain that quality.
Agreed. Mr. Johnson. President
I just
Johnson.
did some quick calculations off the sheet that we were provided. If I just look at straight numbers, when you look at the original contract fee versus the scope of work that was involved, I came to .0175. And under the current contract, although the fee has gone up, so has the scope of work. And the fee that I have now calculated into the increased scope, the percentage actually goes down to .0160. And so you've increased the scope of work by $40 million. But over that time, you've actually reduced your percentage of the fee. So I think it's good value.
And I think, and you guys have expressed that as well, is that, we got a lot of stuff going on in the district with our buildings and everything that's going on, our buses and our technology. And I think you've expressed more than once that although it may not have been directly related to the contract, that Plant Moran Cressa has never once said that's outside of our scope, and not that they have gone and done entire projects, but they've been extremely helpful and have taken care of us on an ongoing basis, and provided a lot of value to what we're doing, and advice that may not be directly related, but that comes along with, some of the other projects that are going on.
Absolutely.
Anybody else? Mrs. Burke?
I just concur with all of my colleagues and have said in the past and will continue to say, Cressa has been a phenomenal partner, Livonia Public Schools. Hiring Plant Moran Cressa to oversee our major building initiatives allows our education team to focus on what we do, which is educating our students. And you and you folks, Scott, have done a phenomenal job, and we will continue to let anybody who asks know that, or I will anyway, speaking for myself.
Okay, so we are going to, are you guys all good? We're going to vote on this on June 4th. Okay, on regular agenda, and that completes the Finance Committee.
Thank you, Mrs. Donovan. That takes us on to item 4, building and site, and I'm sure Mr. Centers is going to be much quicker.
Well, that depends on Mr. Francis.
No, not really.
All right, item A, quarterly dashboard report, Mr. Francis, and Mr. Terrell. Mr. Smith, I'm sorry.
Mr. Senators, thank you very much. I only have item A this evening with the board on building and site. And what we're here for is actually Mr. Scott Smith, who's sitting next to me from Plant Moran Cressa, who was just discussed a few moments ago. He's still blushing from the kind words. Mr. Smith is here to do his, 4 times a year, we do the quarterly dashboard. So it's that time of year again. I think the board has become somewhat used to the pattern in what we do with this quarterly report. And just to be, all upfront and forthright, I did ask Mr. Smith to try to condense it a little bit. We knew that tonight would be a long discussion about the budget. So if at any point you feel like that something that you're used to hearing is missing, or that you have a question, please feel free to ask. But I did ask him to try to condense it a little bit. So.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Francis. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
I guess just to start, I want to appreciate on behalf of all Plant Moran Cressa the nice compliments you've had. We've been lucky to be a part of this team for several years, and it's great to see all the things that this community's voted for and wanted to see come true. Most of it's been put into action now, and we've got another busy summer, as everyone said, but we're ready for it, and we're getting ready to start that here very soon. So we did want to catch the board before the summer months hit and just kind of bring you up to speed. This report is really through the first quarter, so through the end of March 2018. I imagine it'll be late summer or maybe early fall before we really come back and do the June ones, once the next round of board meetings have been established and such. I am going to skip over the upper left corner. That's the overall goals and objectives of the bond, which we're well aware of, and most of it has been implemented. The budget summary, again, is not through the 31st of May. That's current as of when we ran this report, which was May 9th. So again, the budget from last quarter is up about $300,000. So while the bond was passed at $195 million, our systems are tracking to a number of $200,810,500. And again, that's the original 195 plus the $5 million transfer that Mrs. Smith mentioned earlier for Franklin and Stevenson. We also have another $300,000 from the sinking fund for the entryway elements at Niji Iro and also here at the administration building. The $10,500 that you'll see under there is really the design fees for those entryway elements. And then when we renovated Garfield as well, we had that $500,000 transfer from the capital projects fund. So that brings us to the $200,810,500. Our current commitments are about 182 million, almost 183. Really, that number's higher. That's really, when we commit something on our end, it's because everything's in place. The contract's been executed, we have all the appropriate bonds, et cetera, et cetera. So, a lot of the work that you guys voted on and approved is not in that number yet. That number will continue to climb rapidly as those things get executed here in the next few weeks. Yep. So that's up about 11 million in commitments from last quarter. Actual paid is just about 160.6 million, up again about 7 million from last time. That's work that's been ongoing at Churchill, Garfield, some of the other things as well. That's the middle section. Just what's going on over these next 3 months. Again, just a recap for everybody who's listening in, but we've got the second summer at Churchill High School. Predominantly that's going to be the classroom wings, as well as wrapping up the auditoriums. That will continue on through the summer. We're going to get kicked off at this summer's projects, which would be Webster Elementary, Buchanan, Jackson Early Childhood, the Career Center, as well as various entryways at those schools, as well as at Churchill, also at Garfield. So we're getting things ready. Materials are being procured, submittals, RFIs. Some of the work's kind of started second shift, but the majority of the work will start once school gets out. We're starting to walk those buildings with movers and get everybody up to speed with the game plan. So when the bell rings on that Friday, some people leave and a bunch of people come in just wearing different clothes. We'll of course run that through the end of August and get schools ready for turnover just before Labor Day. The next batch is our pavement projects. We've actually got 8 projects this summer across the district: Stevenson, Franklin, Roosevelt, Buchanan, Cooper, Randolph, Frost, and Grant. So 8 different sites will have pavement replacement work done to different degrees based on what was needed. We're in good shape for those. A lot of those materials aren't really long lead items. We're developing a plan, or have developed a plan of how we're kind of working through those projects throughout the summer. So things like Roosevelt will be tied up all summer. Projects like Grant will go rather quickly, and we're scheduling around some of the activities at the school. Our roofing replacement projects have all been awarded. So again, that's work predominantly at Holmes, but also at Franklin High School, and also at the transportation and warehouse buildings. We hope to get started with the transportation and warehouse area pretty soon, actually probably in the next 1 to 2 weeks, since those aren't really school dependent, to get at some of those. Probably the biggest thing that's going to hold up things or has an impact on the roofing is the metal fascia panels at Holmes. Those have been ordered a couple weeks ago, but they are a 13-week lead item. We anticipate getting them about the end of July. So if that holds true, we should be in okay shape, but it's just going to be a push. We're all used to that. That's what they tell you. We'll keep tracking it. We'll keep pushing it. They'd love to get them sooner, so they're going to work with their supplier, and sometimes those numbers change, as they often do. So we'll keep an eye on that and advise the team if there's any deviations. So we don't anticipate it has an impact on any learning environment, but at this time we also fully expect to have it completed. And then our athletic fields will kick off this summer. This summer will be work done at Churchill High School. So we're procuring the materials. So we had a good meeting today over at Churchill to discuss colors.
Yeah, we actually were doing some finalizations, picked some colors. Not that most of it weren't already pretty simple, red and black in a lot of areas, but there were some other color choices, some questions. We reviewed the plans with the administrative team over at Churchill. The athletic director was, of course, part of that. So it was a very good meeting, and when I left Churchill, Mr. E2, the principal, turned and said, "This is really exciting." So.
Yeah, they're breaking out a new logo for this year too, so they're all excited about that. That'll be on display on the field, on the center field and end zones as well. And we walked just about a week ago. We went back through and we revisited the dugouts. As you're aware, we did not recommend award for those a while back, so we're revisiting those. Also walking the Stevenson and Franklin sites this spring, this summer, trying to get ahead of that design and get those decisions finalized so we can get that work bid out this fall, late fall, early winter, to optimize the plans and make sure that we're getting the best bidder participation we can before a lot of other companies have filled up their workload for next year.
Administrative teams from Franklin and Stevenson, 2 weeks ago, we met with both of them and walked in the fields, great discussion, had conversations with them, getting them on board and starting the process early.
If it keeps raining, we might want to have a rowing team.
It's amazing.
And I should mention, we're doing the same thing with our roofing projects. The team sat down, we've identified Johnson Elementary, Upper Elementary as our next project. We're working with RTA to formalize a proposal based on the bid results from this year, and we'll be presenting that information to you guys at an upcoming board meeting too. But they are very interested in continuing on with the district. I believe they'll maintain the fee rate that they've proposed before.
Which was a good rate.
Which is approximately 2.8% of the budgeted work. And so we're moving that forward as well. The idea there, again, would be to bid things out in the fall, late fall, early winter. Again, get on the front side of that cycle and continue that through. Critical project issues, we're very close. We're wrapping up things with Garfield Elementary. We're busy procuring long lead items for the summer. We talked a little bit about the metal fascia panel procurement for Holmes Middle School. We're also going to be walking at the end of this month with NTH Consultants. We've identified at least a preliminary list of projects we want to tackle from a pavement replacement project. So we'll be walking those, determine what the needs are at those schools, define some budgets and estimates for that. Probably try to get NTH back on board for this summer, who's been doing that, helping us do that for the last few summers. So again, just trying to get ahead of the curve for next year, get things lined up before the summer rush hits and everybody's schedules gets a little bit more dicey and you're not able to devote quite as much time and energy towards it. So we'll be walking that actually after Labor Day on the 30th. Again, design work for the roofing project. We're working to define the scope over at Stevenson and Franklin in terms of the athletic fields and surrounding areas. Rebid the dugout work at Churchill. Mr. Francis can probably elaborate more, but the playground replacements have been ongoing. They've been moving fast.
Moving along and looking very good. I don't know if anybody has gotten the chance to catch one of the
Webster's is looking phenomenal.
Right.
It's great.
Right, the colors, it's a really sharp, and buildings chose some different colors, and then some of them were very similar, like the swings, but it looks very sharp. And then our team, the LPS team, is coming in behind after the new items have been set and placed. Our LPS team is coming in with items that are still there, that remained, were not pulled out, et cetera, and they're backfilling, doing some extra, blowing extra fiber onto the surround of those events, et cetera, and they're looking sharp. I know that, for those at home who are listening, I know that it's an inconvenience. There's some pretty nice days last week, even though it rains nearly every day now, apparently. We live in Florida. But, I know there are some really nice afternoons, and there might be some frustration in recess time, et cetera. But, the crews are getting through pretty quickly, or at least as quickly as they can based upon the weather.
Who are we? Building and Site.
Oh, yeah.
Are the schools not allowed to be out on recess when they're installing, or no? Is that what you said the frustration is about? Just not being actually.
The answer is it depends.
Okay.
Because
where it's located.
Right, if they're
where the
working
build site is located.
there could be a possibility that some schools have two sites, and one's being worked on but not the other.
Okay.
Well, you can go on the one.
Yeah.
Now, there could be that both are being worked on. The crew is just there.
Right.
The crew is going to work on everything
Right.
as quickly as they can in an expeditious manner. So perhaps they have to have indoor recess. I've spoken to a couple of principals, and principals, they're fine. They're like, we get it. We've done it.
Right.
We're good to go.
So it's principal dependent or building dependent?
It is.
It's not like the district?
Correct. If when the crews come, they will say, stay off of this.
Okay.
And they'll wrap it up, or the principal has spoken to some of the folks in the crew, and they can simply say, where are we at here? Well, you can't be over here, and even when it looks like it's done, it needs time to set. They'll wrap it up with a little tape, et cetera.
Okay.
I mean, frankly, I haven't heard anything from the buildings saying this is a problem, because they know if they are just patient for a few days, they said the kids are chomping at the bit, but.
Right.
You know.
I have heard a little bit of people, but I know the other buildings are outside during recess, so I wasn't sure but it was building
It's all
different.
building
really
dependent.
site
Yeah, it's really building dependent, just depending on what's being worked on, because some buildings have far more work than other buildings being done even.
Right.
Sorry. And then proposal for 19. is that
Yep,
right?
and then as we said, we're evaluating what's left in the bond, and then discussing collectively, what we want to do with those funds. We've got about $1 million tied up in construction contingency for the bond projects for this year. We're hopeful, we've identified things and that could potentially be a nice savings there that we can help to use that. We're not forecasting that for right now, but that's always the goal and the potential. We've got about $618,000 in owner's contingency currently in the bond. As Ms. Smith mentioned, there's some interest as well that, again, to help us plan and provide thought for next year's work. Cash flow financials, we've spent about $150 million through the end of March. And again, just for the community, the buildings for this summer, from the bond perspective, is Churchill, Garfield, Buchanan, Webster, Jackson, the Career Center, and then, of course, the various entryways across the district.
Any comments or questions?
Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Mr. Smith.
Item B is.
Before we go to item B, we've been here over 2.5 hours. Anybody want to stretch their legs for a couple of
Yes,
minutes?
please.
So why don't we take 5 and we'll be back.
Sounds like.
Thank you, and we are back and refreshed and ready to go on with our agenda. So, Mr. Centers, take it away.
Okay, so now we're on item B, which is purchase of elementary music equipment. Mr. Archibald.
Thank you, Mr. Centers. Members of the board, we're very excited to be bringing this recommendation to you tonight. Just a couple recaps, just as a reminder, and you know from our conversations at previous study session meetings, we have allocation of dollars from the 2013 bond earmarked for elementary music equipment and instruments. Melody Provencher started this work working with our elementary music teachers to identify instrument and equipment prior to her retirement last year, and then Byron Turner picked it up again this year, again working with our current elementary teachers. We modeled it similarly to we did to a model with when we purchased technology for the classrooms, and that we really wanted all of our elementary music classrooms throughout the district to be equipped with the same instruments and equipment, so that wherever you were in the district, our students were getting the same experience, and our teachers had the same equipment with which to work. So again, Melody and Byron worked with the teachers to identify equipment to purchase. We put out an RFP in late April. Those bids were opened on May 8th. We did not get a complete bid, nor either individually or combined, but we did analyze the bids and are recommending to you that we purchase $21,039.70 worth of equipment from the Sam Ash Quick Ship Corporation and $77,716.30 from the West Music Company for a total award of $98,756. While you're at the break, I put two pieces of paper in front of you. In your board packet, you received a breakdown of the bid, but then I grouped it. If you look at the spreadsheet, it has green and yellow on it. So this would give you an idea of the lower elementary buildings. You can see there, as you look down that column, on this purchase, that's what each lower elementary building is receiving. And then the same for Nigiero, the same for Webster, and the same for the upper elementary. I highlighted them. The items highlighted in green are from the West Music Company, and those highlighted in yellow are from the Sam Ash Quick Ship Corporation. Careful.
Don't say that fast.
Yeah, don't say that fast. And then I also provided for you some pictures. This is the majority of the equipment that's listed here. It may not be, although when I went in and searched, I put in the name and model number that we've selected. But you have to trust my musical expertise might limit what I cut and paste. So this is
Close.
close to it, but I wanted to give you an idea of the equipment. So you can see it all there. And again, we're very excited to be able to get this equipment ordered and back in time for school next year.
Okay, any comments or questions?
Looks fabulous.
Steve, at the top of your color-coded tonight, the numbers at the top mean what?
There are 10 lower elementary schools, 1 Nijiro, 1 Webster, and 5, or I'm sorry, that's a 5 for upper L. Obviously, that should be a 3. I apologize.
Okay, thanks.
Anything else?
And just a reminder that we'll hopefully be coming forward with some of the other smaller handheld equipment as well, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Based on the items, as we talked at the study session, that we did not receive a bid from
And
companies.
I'd be happy to cover that if you want.
Sure.
Okay. We have some assorted handheld percussion instruments for the K4, for Webster and Nijiro. We have some string and band instruments for the 5-6 buildings, for Webster and for Nijiro. Some student chairs for the 5-6, the upper L and Webster, and then classroom sound systems for all the classrooms. In looking at this, I think now we could probably break this out where the assorted handheld percussion instruments, we may be able to go out and buy direct based on that total amount. The string and band instruments, we could bid again. And I think in looking at that, and if I had to do this entire thing over again, I would take us in the direction of separate bids so that these were broken out maybe a little bit differently by, because not all these companies deal in strings or deal in percussion, and so we could target the vendors for the string instruments or the band instruments and so forth. So I think we'll be able to have a pretty strategic approach at the remaining items and get those in early next fall.
Mrs. Burke?
Are these items also looking to be targeted to arrive by next fall?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? I don't know what a boom whacker is, but
This is the very last picture, and apparently you can hit those tubes against items and make a sound, or you can line them up and beat on them with a mallet and make a sound, and
Oh,
that's.
those lucky music teachers.
I have probably oversimplified all you can do with a boom whacker.
Karen wants the glockenspiel.
Well, thank you, Mr. Archibald.
Okay, we need to vote on that.
Yes.
I want the
Yes.
12-piece
Regular.
drum set. That looks fun.
Yeah, that is cool.
All right, next up, we'll have item C. Mr. Wilberg will be presenting. It's the Stevenson High School Flexible Furniture Plan.
Thank you, Mr. Centers. President Johnson, I'm feeling by now that you're becoming quite the experts at flexible furniture plans as we present our 4th school, at secondary school regarding flexible furniture plans. Tonight, we'll continue our conversation from last week where we began to speak about Stevenson High School's plan. And again, the monies from the 2013 bond were set aside to replace and enhance the furniture at the secondary schools, roughly $2 million. We're in phase 3 of that. We're at the tail end of this enterprise and have some exciting opportunities to provide some creative and exciting contemporary learning environments, if you will. Now, the primary point of focus for the Stevenson plan is to create customizable learning spaces in the entry of their library media center. You can tell from pages 3, 4, and 5 in the handouts I gave you that, it's a total redesign, opening up of that area. The plan calls for 24 new computer desks with chairs, lounge-type chairs with coffee tables, various bench-type seating with separate and with integrated tables, sectional sofa seating, ottomans, and bar-height tables with stools. Upholstered hallway benches just outside the LMC will also be added. So the focus of their effort is in that LMC area to spark that to life and add a lot of color. They also look at enhancing their group room, which is part of their guidance area, where they meet for student groups, if you will. That area will be enhanced by sofa-type lounge chairs and a new conference table. The Stevenson staff has consulted with Interior Environments, and that invoice totals $70,809.61. Those chairs have some exciting names, not quite as exciting as the percussion instruments, but along the Akia lines of, I hope you don't ask me to pronounce it.
Yeah.
But you have some color pictures of what some of those chairs and tables, ottomans, and various seating arrangements might look like.
That's great.
We're certainly recommending your continuing consideration and eventual approval for the Stevenson High School Flexible Furniture Plan.
Comments or questions? Mrs. Bergen.
One thing, having had high schoolers, by that age, going to the LMC is not something that they spend a lot of time doing. It looks like, and it's my hope that they're trying to create a more welcoming atmosphere where students will want to and feel free to drop in and spend some time there, whether they're studying for other classes or what have you. Am I reading correctly here that this is what the goal is?
Absolutely, it's part of the climate goals, sense to have that more welcoming, more colorful experience.
Okay, good, thank you.
Mr. Johnson.
I'm assuming, Mr. Wallenberg, that we're looking at the fall for the implementation.
Yes, that's the plan, is that these schools that were able to piece this together before we recessed here for the summer, we'd have everything in and delivered as we start this new school year.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Thank you. One of the things I find interesting is, as we move into a period where we're providing or expecting our students to have devices, personal devices like Chromebooks and such, this furniture has places to plug them in, has chargers built in. It's very accommodating for students to sit with a computer and actually get some work done, which is a really nice way to take our LMCs into the 21st century. I love the way it meshes with our plans for that. And it's comfortable looking as well. So I might have to head over there and get some work done.
It's almost like you want to put on your slippers and curl up in those chairs and read a book. So.
Maybe they'll just have a board section.
Yeah, there you go.
It looks more comfortable than my kitchen table.
Anything else?
June 4th?
June
4th.
Regular?
June 4th it
Recommend
is.
for the consent agenda.
Oh, are we?
I'm sorry.
No, not
Voting,
consent.
not
Regular?
Yep.
Sorry.
Okay.
Nice try.
Yeah. No, we want the community to know about this. Yeah.
These are, each one has its own unique flavor, and it really is so reflective of the needs, the ideas of that particular school. I think that's been an exciting element, Mr. Wallenberg. So please thank the school-based teams, and certainly for your efforts in shepherding them through this.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Mr.
Thank you.
Johnson, that concludes building section.
Wow, good job.
Wow, thank you, Mr. Centers.
That's a record.
And that will take us on to item 5, curriculum. Mrs. Jarvis.
Thank you, President Johnson. Tonight on our curriculum agenda, we will be considering the textbook adoption recommendation based on information from Mrs. O'Brien.
Thank you, Mrs. Jarvis. I'm here this evening with Mr. Hillard, our K-12 math science coordinator, and he has been working with a team of high school math teachers this year to evaluate our statistics curriculum and to select the best materials for recommendation. Mr. Hillard, would you like to share with us about your committee?
Yep, we had a committee of 3 teachers. Our old statistics book, as you may remember, was from the 90s. The big focus on the presidential election was Ross Perot election, so it was a little dated. So statistics is something that has a lot of technology, a lot of software, so we were pretty behind on that. So we brought some teachers together. We had one of our teachers from MSC, because he teaches a statistics class, getting ready for the AP, the advanced topics in MSC, and then teachers from our regular statistics course as well to kind of get together and to look at all materials. And we determined that we could find books that could be appropriate for both classes, ones that would cover the AP materials and still have the readability and the engagement that was looking for. We found a book that we felt met both courses very well. It was used in both courses. The kids appreciated the new book, appreciated the use of it, the look and feel of it. So we are recommending the Stats Modeling the World book. I think you have the recommendation and the cost proposal. It was rated the highest by far of any of the statistics books we looked at. We felt it was very readable for students, engaging, had a lot of application problems that were up to date. We do have 6-year licenses as part of the quote for the online program that includes some statistics, I'm having a hard time saying that word, software, as well as some personalized learning that we can take advantage of for that.
So this textbook would be for 2 courses, statistics and then the MSc.
Advanced topics.
Advanced topics. So we are recommending this textbook, Stats Modeling the World. The budget would be from our secondary textbook budget, and it would be for $33,603.79. Questions?
Okay. Mrs. Bowden?
This is more for, well, one of you can take a stab at this. I see from the overview that you wrote up that Churchill is offering stats right now. Stevenson did, but did not in this past year. Can you tell us why Stevenson was not offering it this past year and why Franklin is not offering it?
We didn't have enough students who registered for the course.
Okay.
Correct.
Yeah, so some of those decisions, they get made once the scheduling they have to make some tough decisions sometimes. So some courses turn into an every other year until they can get enough students every year. I mean, I would love to see statistics every school. I think it's one of the most important classes that kids can take. And so I would love to see it. Churchill this year might have enough to run 2 sections beside the MSc, but again, that's going to come down to decisions that their schedulers have to make, which are very tough decisions, so.
Okay.
They could probably answer more on that.
And Franklin, the same situation. It's just a matter of we're struggling with the lack of students to fill a one course. Is that correct?
I mean, I believe so, as far as I've heard. The last teacher that they had teaching it has retired, so nobody at their school has taught it as well, which would be another thing at Franklin. So it's getting a teacher that feels qualified and ready to do it along with the students.
Okay.
We shared these materials at the secondary principal meeting, and everyone saw it, and we did have some conversation about drumming up some business for these courses that we are updating, and, updating the curriculum, the assessments, and then the new materials. So we have had that conversation with administrators that that's our goal, is that these courses, we're looking for support at the building level for them.
Okay, and that's kind of where I was going with this also. I mean, it seems like such a vital course for so many students to take, whether they're going to college or whether they're going directly into the workforce. Data is,
I agree,
is integral to almost 100%. Any job you're going to have. So yep. I would be thrilled if we would be offering it at all 3 of our high schools. So any efforts toward that end, I think,
I would be as well, for
okay.
sure. I agree. I think it's one of the most important classes. Any career that you go into, you're going to need some sort of statistics background.
Okay. Thank you.
Bonnefield?
Considering that Franklin and Stevenson are not providing the class right now, are there books to cover those sections? Or if Stevenson and Franklin did start teaching statistics, we'd have to purchase more textbooks?
So Stevenson, we're not sure if they're going to run next year. So we ordered enough for the MSc class and 3 other courses.
Okay.
Whether it's 2 at Churchill, if they do end up running 2, while we wait for the Franklin to get going, and then 1 at Stevenson, that would be an option. If we end up running 2 at one school and then 1 at each of the other schools, then we would have to order more in addition to the MSc, but we look like we'll be good.
Okay, and when
For
you
one at
talk
each.
about drumming up business, do you guys let the kids know in the prereq classes or the classes that they need to take before they take statistics that, that we've got the new textbook and it's up to, okay.
So I think that's one of the things is they see the new materials. They've had a 20-plus-year-old book.
Yeah.
That
which can be very
see
discouraging.
the new materials, the interactive things with the computer.
Yeah.
That will support that. Kids will start talking to kids too. So teachers will see the new materials. They'll be able to share with kids. So that's what we're looking
That's fantastic. Thank you.
Mrs. Brad?
Thank you. Is statistics a half-year course or full year?
It has been a half year in the past, but it will be a full year going forward.
Oh, it will, because I was going to say, would it be possible that you could run a statistics class at Churchill, let's say, first semester, and then collect the books and send them over to a second semester statistics, but this is going to be a year-long course?
Year-long course, yep.
Okay.
Do the kids have
Thank you.
room in their schedules to take
Statistics for a full year?
statistics?
Yeah,
Year math.
it'd be a 4th-year math class, so it'd be an option for students. And it's, we have the AP edition, and although we don't offer it as an AP class except in MSc, it is one of the most accessible AP tests, so we're trying to have an entry to kids that normally don't have access to any AP math tests, that this is one that is most accessible. It has the best passing rates of any test, so we're trying to get that all year going where other kids have those opportunities that if they didn't make it into AP Calculus, that they wouldn't have otherwise.
Okay. Oh, good.
Mrs. Burton?
Mrs. Elquist, can you let the board know if we get into a situation where we have the ability to offer it at one of our schools, but we don't have enough books ordered on this order? Because, speaking for myself as a board member, I don't want to see us have a course offered at some schools, but not another one because we didn't have the books.
Oh, that's certainly, absolutely, I would agree. That will not be the deciding factor. So again, as, the scheduling process is very complex.
Right.
And so part of it is reliant upon the choices that students make and their secondary and third choices. And it is a very difficult decision based on the staffing that they receive and allocate out per department, based on the number of students who have potentially registered or indicated an interest, and whether or not it is prudent to allocate 2/10 of staffing for that particular course if you have, a significantly lower number of students than you may in the others. So those are very challenging decisions, not only for students to make with regard to, as you asked, room in their schedule, but it also is as well for the scheduler and for the administration of the school in working with our staff here, our cabinet members here, to determine where those staffing allocations will be made. So it is a bit of a balance, and certainly as students continue to express interest, we would like to continue to support their exploration of statistics as an option.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Did you say whether those also come with an electronic version?
They do.
They
We have
do.
a 6-year license included in the quote.
Okay, so in theory, we've got sufficient books, just half of them are digital.
Right.
Oh.
Yeah, that's true.
Do we ever, like if there are not enough students at Franklin, but it's being offered at Stevenson, do we ever take advantage of technology to allow those students at Franklin to take the class via technology from Stevenson or?
Remotely?
Right. Have we not done that?
So we haven't had that ability in every building, right? So we just finished, or finishing Churchill. So that is actually something I've brought up, is could students be in a classroom and via Google Hangouts or Skype participate in a class? So that has been something we've talked about. We have in other years also bused students for courses to other schools, but am wondering now that we have some technology, would that be something we could try?
Good question. Any other questions or comments? Thank you, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. President Johnson, that concludes the curriculum committee report.
Thank you, Mrs. Jarvis. That will take us to item 6, Personnel Committee, and Mrs. Frank.
Thank you. Mr. Archibald is going to present us with an update on our layoff and recall process. Correct?
Correct. Good evening again.
Good evening.
Just want to cover some bullet points and give you an update. As you know, our staffing needs are determined in the spring of each year for the following school year. There are probably 3 key factors that influence those. Our student enrollment, our contractually mandated staffing, and the financial picture or position of the district. The staffing allocation is determined at central office and shared with the building administrators, who then determine their need, which staff are surplus, which staff are needed, and what vacancies they may have for the coming school year. And again, that's based on the staff that they have currently and looking at what the staffing need they anticipate for the coming year. That information at all levels is shared with Mr. McDonald, who in turn works with Cabinet and the building administrators to put all the puzzle pieces together, and ultimately decides, what our needs are and ensures that all of our positions are filled with properly certified and highly qualified teachers. We determine what vacancies we still have, and then, unfortunately, what teachers, if there are any, that would go on layoff. Those reasons to be on layoff, one, quite obviously, we may not have a position for that person. Some, they may currently hold a full-time position and we need to reduce their assignment. In order to do that, we need to lay them off and then recall them to the lesser assignment. And in some cases, the picture is just still uncertain, and as we're looking at teachers that might be coming off of a leave or various other circumstances, we don't quite have all the pieces together, and therefore we've got to lay off enough folks so that we're able to deal with those unknowns or the uncertainties. Layoff can be a very, very stressful event for a teacher. Mr. McDonald has worked incredibly hard the last 2 years to keep the staff on layoff at a bare minimum, and I commend him for that because it takes a lot of work on his part and with Cabinet and with the building administration to know that all those I's are dotted and T's are crossed. Currently, we have no teachers that are on layoff from previous school years. We will be anticipating that under the June 4th meeting, we'll bring forward to you a small list of teachers for layoff. We anticipate layoffs in our shared time program, as was alluded to earlier. We're with losing the approximately 40 FTEs from Ladywood, that'll translate to a loss of staff, and so we'll be laying off some shared time teachers, as well as a very small number of other teachers. Not sure why I was struggling with the word there. In addition to bringing that list, then we work with the buildings to notify all the individuals individually and make them aware of their status for next year. But then we'll also ask you for the recall authorization so that as we put the pieces back together, we can begin recalling teachers as soon as possible. The only other thing to share is that at the June 1st paycheck, we also need to provide reasonable assurance because of the length of our break. Any employees who are not given reasonable assurance, which roughly translates to we anticipate in good faith having a position for them the following year that's at least 80% in wages and benefits of the previous year. Anyone that does not have reasonable assurance is eligible for unemployment benefits over the summer. And so we provide that notification, and we'll work with the finance office and provide it with the paychecks on June 1st. So, any questions about any of that?
Mr. Archibald, can you just remind us why, even though many or most of these teachers are recalled, why we have to go through the layoff process?
Yeah, in some cases, it's a full-time teacher, and we're calling them back to a less than full-time position, so we need to do that. And in other cases, we're still waiting to see exactly what positions we have for them, and if we don't put them on layoff, then we have some entitlement, or they have some,
We have obligations.
Thank you, obligations good, or if I couldn't get teacher, I knew I wasn't going to get obligation. Then we have an obligation to them for employment the following year.
Okay.
So in some cases, as you know, we have enrollments that take place over the summer, and so sometimes those pop up more heavily in one particular grade level or an area, or at a particular high school where maybe we're staffed really just so, and so that may have required us to reduce the number of staff in a particular department or at a particular school. If their enrollment unexpectedly goes up from the number that has been predicted, we may have to bring those folks back. But again, if we don't do that at this point in time, then we are obligated to employ them at their same status for the following year. So although we, as Mr. Archibald mentioned, we have worked very hard through Mr. McDonald's office to lessen that number and to not have a wide number of teachers laid off who we are relatively confident we're going to bring back. We do need to provide the district, with our fiduciary responsibility, some assurance that we have some room within that, and that's why we do lay off some teachers at the lowest level of the seniority.
Thank you.
And some districts may lay off far back and then take time to put the pieces back together, and that just seems like a lot to put folks through unnecessarily. And so I again commend Keith for working so hard to keep it to a minimum.
Any other questions? No? Okay. Transition to EduStaff. Mr. Archibald.
Yes, thank you. Prior to the fall of 2008, substitute teachers in our district were direct hires. Beginning in the fall of 2008, as a cost containment measure, LPS entered into an agreement with a third-party provider, PESG, to provide substitute teachers. As such, we would pay a percentage to PESG, but that percentage was far less than the retirement and FICA that we would be paying. And so there you make up the difference, and that's the cost savings. By comparison, it's roughly 40% retirement and FICA, and it's about 17.9% cost to use PESG. So again, there's a savings there. LPS was able to take advantage of consortium pricing through an agreement that Wayne Risa had negotiated with PESG. Services through PESG were expanded to include substitute secretaries, substitute paraprofessionals, noon monitors, crowd control, and extra duty event staff through another company of PESG, which is Staff EZ, and then eventually coaches through one of their companies, which was Coach EZ. So again, Coach EZ and Staff EZ are under the PESG umbrella. Wayne Risa put out an RFP this past winter for third-party substitute teacher services. EduStaff which is very popular throughout throughout Oakland County and a couple of Wayne County districts currently. EduStaff was awarded the bid, and RISA entered into an agreement, again, providing consortium pricing for the districts within the ISD. We reviewed it very closely. We are not obligated to use EduStaff. By going with EduStaff, we simply get to take advantage of the pricing that was negotiated for the 2-year period for substitute teachers. We looked at our situation, again, with PESG, with Staff Easy, and with Coach Easy. Mr. McDonald and I met a couple different times with the folks from EduStaff, talked about it with our cabinet group, and we certainly feel that it is a better situation for us, for the district, to make the transition to EduStaff. We think by the customer service from EduStaff, from everything that we've heard from the many districts that use it, and from our experience with it so far, we expect the customer service to be vastly improved. We expect their marketing and recruitment efforts. We certainly expect them to be more ambitious, more aggressive, more proactive in helping us fill vacancies. I don't know, we have pretty good fill rates, and through the HR departments, we communicate with throughout the other districts in Wayne County, and when you compare, there aren't enough subs to go around, bottom line. There just aren't, for the number of vacancies that exist, maybe in a given day or a particular, in a particular day. But by comparison, our district has relatively good fill rates, but that's certainly an area that we want to work to improve. I don't want to put out any false sense that by going to EduStaff, we're going to resolve the fill rate issues. I certainly don't anticipate it getting any worse. I think we'll at least maintain where we are, if not improve. Again, I think their marketing and recruitment efforts will pay off in that regard. I think, like we're doing now, we're using a preferred sub in our elementary triads. We've had good luck with that. We can continue doing that, and we'll have conversations with them about incentive programs to try and get subs to continue to choose LPS. We do think, again, there are a couple districts I'm aware of who are going to stay with PESG. We think the sub pool, by going with EduStaff, while folks will go with EduStaff and they get to choose then what districts they want to be in, if we're having trouble filling a particular spot and that person doesn't exist within our pool, then we can go within the EduStaff pool as well and work with them to fill it. So our pool of subs, that we'll have access to is certainly going to be large, and we don't anticipate subs to maintain working in both PESG and EduStaff. We just don't anticipate that. So, a couple last points, and then I'll entertain any questions. The cost difference is negligible. In fact, if we choose, which we're planning on choosing a different vendor for our coaches, we'll actually be about a $8,000 to $10,000 savings overall. And again, we're reviewing that agreement right now with a different vendor. The transition to EduStaff has begun. We've signed our agreements. We've had our meetings. They'll actually have some space in this office tomorrow for folks they're beginning to roll over the current staff. We've already sent out communication from the district to our current subs, notifying them of the transition. EduStaff has been in contact with them, and the first pool of folks we go for are those that are currently actively, what we say, on our census and actively subbing in our district this year. So, any questions?
Mrs. Benefield?
Are there any cost savings recognized in addition to the direct cost savings with EduStaff? Is there, do we incur any additional costs when we are unable to fill a sub position that will, in addition to the reduced cost, and then it will also see a reduction in, utilizing regular staff member, that's not the right term.
Yeah, full-time
Mrs.
staff.
Oquist is shaking her
Sure.
head. You can probably.
If, again, the caveat would be if our fill rate improves, which,
Yes.
again, this is a statewide issue.
Crisis.
There is a
Understood.
significant issue with a substitute shortage across the state of Michigan, and we do not see the overall forecast of that changing in the near future. However, if we were able to increase our fill rate even by 1% or 2%, every time we don't have to pull one of our full-time or part-time staff members who are currently employed by Livonia Public Schools to cover that during, let's say, their planning period or during a time when they're not otherwise assigned, we would save that stipend that we have to pay for each hour that they do cover those classes.
I think that's exactly the question I was asking.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
You bet.
Mrs. Burton. Is this going to change the amount that we pay our substitute teachers, or are they unaffected other than which company their paycheck is going to go through?
It's just a matter of who it goes to. It won't change our rate. We control what they get paid, and so unless we were to make that decision,
Okay.
so currently they'll get paid the same.
Okay.
And again, unless we have an incentive. And when I say the cost difference is negligible, that's comparing if our usage is identical next year to what it is this year when we
Yeah.
get these numbers.
Understood.
Certainly that could change.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Do we need to take any action on this?
We do not.
And are we going to, this is just for committee of the whole, we're not going to take this to the?
Correct.
No, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Arthur.
Thank you.
And that concludes personnel. President Johnson.
Thank you, Mrs. Rank. That will then take us to item 7, the Policy Committee. And Mrs. Burton.
Thank you. As we start out policy, I mentioned to Mrs. Oquist and Mr. Johnson recently, I wanted to take a moment and just briefly go over the types of things that come before the board under the guise of, or under the title of policy, and why we vote on some and we don't vote on others. There are really 3 items that we see in our policy book for our 600-page board policy. The first section is bylaw and/or policy, and those are basically the board directing what is going to happen. For example, we will have a balance, we will have a budget presented to the Board of Education by such and such a date for approval. Those are items the board is directing that this shall happen, that the board votes on. And those would typically then go through the first and second readings. Another section of our policy book deals with administrative procedures. That is, in essence, how something is going to happen. It's titled Administrative Procedures as a clue. The administration is going to handle that part of it. Those come before the board just for our information purposes. But the board, since this is how that's going to be carried out on a day-to-day basis, that is something the board does not vote on. It's brought before us for our information only. The last section is far less frequent, and those are exhibits. Those are examples of a specific form that might be used in a given situation. So therefore, there are some items that the board would vote on, bylaws and policies, but administrative procedures we do not vote on. They all come before the board for information purposes, but if that's just kind of a brief overview. Secondly, we have folks ask periodically why we don't use Neola for our policies. Neola is offered on I believe, a nationwide basis as a school board policy, and we have the option, if we chose to utilize that. The reason that our Board of Education in the past, I'm speaking historically, has not done so is rather than adopting a cookie-cutter set of policies that may or may not fit Livonia Public Schools, we have instead looked at Neola for some guidance when writing our policy. We've also looked at surrounding school districts that are similar in demographics, size, geographic area, et cetera, when writing our policy. But this board historically has opted to write our policy using those as resources, but write our policy so it is specific to Livonia Public Schools. So if you ever hear the question about why we don't use Neola, that is why. It is one very valuable resource, but it may or may not fit our district and how we want to write our policy. The first item under policy is policies that deal with our finance section, and we have Mrs. Smith.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here with you again tonight. Tonight, I'm proposing changes to a few policies that fall under that Section D, the fiscal management. The first policy for our discussion is Policy DA, and I'll go kind of quickly over that one because truly, as it stands, it's very well written and very much applicable to our district right now. So just wanted to make a note that it was reviewed in April of this year, or May. So
If we could interrupt you for just a moment, Mr. Senator, did you have something that needs to be addressed right now?
So there's one thing about DA that kind of bothers me.
Yeah.
And it's number 2. It says, provide a system to ensure that resources of the school system be safeguarded and used only for the benefit of the students of the system. I think that's a little strange, because if we buy an office chair in central office, is that to the benefit of the students of the system?
Yes, they're happier staff, and then they're going to turn.
Okay, I see it, but
Yeah.
I was just kind of wondering
Yeah.
if resources of the school system will be safeguarded and used for appropriate district purposes or something like that might be better. I don't know, just a thought.
Okay. Why don't we have you go through DA, what you wanted to cover on DA, and then we'll address your question, Mr. Sanders.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah, as I was reading through it, again, it seems to me that they're very much still, in line with what we're doing and what our goals and objectives are as far as the fiscal management of the resources entrusted to us. But I'm very happy to hear suggestions if there's things that make the policy more clear.
Okay.
So,
Would it assist you, Mr. Sanders, if we modified that to say something like, and used primarily for the benefits of the students in the system, or, keeping the students of the system at the forefront of the fiscal decision-making?
Yeah, and then you can even leave it. To me, it sounded a little strange.
Only is a pretty, is a.
Yeah, I
is a-
agree with that. Only is.
To
benefit the students and staff?
Or ultimately for the benefits of the school system? I mean,
Or can we just get rid of the and the rest of it? The resources are going to be safeguarded?
Just take out only and used for the benefit of the students.
I'm okay with taking out only. Because I do like the idea of the policy, of the statement that that is our goal.
Right.
We don't
That's why we
exist
exist.
to serve the adults in the district.
Right.
That's a primary, or rather, that's a secondary benefit, is we employ a lot of folks, but our purpose is to benefit our students.
Yeah, I think if you just took out only.
What does everyone else think?
Sounds good.
Instead of saying used only for the benefit, say used only to benefit.
Mm-hmm. I'm okay with that, because that is what, even when our employees are using equipment, it is to benefit our students. What are other thoughts?
It's funny now that I'm pondering that more, what you said, Mr. Centers, about the only students, or even having the students. I think that is the heart of why we're here, of course, is to support the students. But I think of some of going through that budget that we just went through, that we have like community service things that, maybe we incur some costs with having some people come in and use our building or something like that, that it doesn't necessarily tie right back to the K-12 purpose of why we're here, that we also are, a resource for our community, and, yeah.
Mrs. Bradford?
I like primarily, only because that kind of it's open for, I think, other uses, but primarily it's benefiting the students. I think if we took the word out, used for the benefit of the students of the system, it still doesn't kind of encompass additional people that may be benefiting from it. So personally, I think putting in primarily would be a suitable verbiage.
I agree with you, because primarily leaves it open to, it's not exclusively, but it does show where our focus is.
For example, I believe we have policy that addresses the emergency uses of our buses by our community and our police department and so forth, if needed on an emergency basis and that kind of thing. Okay. So I'm hearing we're going to take out only for the, and change that to primarily to, so it would read, the second half of the sentence would read, and used primarily to benefit the students of the system? Is that?
Primarily for the benefit, just replace only with primarily.
Yeah.
I can do that, either one. Thoughts?
I like just taking out only and
swap
putting
the
in
word.
primarily.
Okay. Okay, change only to primarily.
Okay, can we give that a first reading on June 4th then? We'll be ready?
We can. Are there any other questions on DA?
Okay, we'll put
Okay, first reading on June 4th.
Can I say that is why I appreciate our board so much, that it's late in the evening.
Sure.
It's been a very full agenda, but you're still very much in tune and on target and, looking at these things, so I appreciate that. Thank you. The next policy is currently policy DCA, and because some things have changed, I'm proposing would that be a title or the marking to be DB, but same title, budget goals and objectives, and just a few changes here, and so I'll read through them and then take any comments you have. The budget of the school district shall provide information on the educational activities for which public funds are being expended and the costs thereof. Number 2, ensure the continuance of this educational program for the budgeted period of time. Number 3, be regarded as an important public relations instrument as it communicates the prioritization of resources. 4, serves as a means of financial control. 5, provide the Board of Education and Administration with the authority to make expenditures within the approved budget to support the educational programs. Number 6, serve as a basis for determining the amount of revenue which must be obtained from local taxation. 7, serve as an instrument that will facilitate accurate estimates of future expenditures. And 8, serve as an instrument by which the board may study the expenditures of the district by budget categories, thus enabling them to better evaluate individual projects. So one item of note, too, under number 1, you'll see the wording that we've included in here is taken from number 3. It seemed to make better sense to move that up. So when you see 3, that's not completely being removed from the policy, but instead being moved up to number 1. But anybody had any thoughts on this?
Are there questions or comments on the revised DB? Mrs. Jarvis?
More of an observation, I don't know if we need to act on it. Number 6 serves as a basis for determining the amount of revenue which must be obtained from local taxation. It occurs to me that when this was originally written, it was prior to Proposal A, and everything has changed since then. So maybe we need to reconsider how number 6 is phrased.
And we actually had that discussion on that. We still have a few, like, for instance, our sinking fund and our debt levy, where we actually do, on the June 4th meeting, we'll have a special meeting to talk about what taxes we need to levy in order to be able to make our debt payments. So we still do have, we still do that. But as you were saying, too, we do have, this funding has changed since this has originally was written. Yeah. But we still do what they call an L-4029 form, and then we give that over to our taxing authorities, and they collect taxes for us, so.
Yeah. Any other comments or questions? No? Okay. Go ahead and put this forth for first reading then on June 4th. Next item. DC.
Budget preparation and adoption. And I wanted to mention, just the way that it was prepared, the next 2 policies, you'll see are crossed through, but that's because we're proposing combining that with policy DC. In fact, I think I mislabeled it at the top. So, like, starting with the prior to final adoption, you can see that's actually coming from current policy DCDA. And the next policy, DCE, final adoption of budget, the Board of Education shall adopt the budget, so that's been included on this new proposed policy, DC, because they're all pertaining to the preparation and adoption of the budget, so it seemed to make sense to put those together. So
Do you want it to say DB or DC at the top of the crossed out words?
The policy we just looked at was DB, so I'm kind of.
DC.
Yeah, I'm sorry, the cross out, yes.
the cross out.
Right, because they say combined with policy DB.
Yep, and it should be DC, thank you.
Are there any questions on the 3 red corrections or updates on DC?
One item I wanted to note is just share the intention on the 4th paragraph down. At this public hearing, the board shall provide copies of the budget summaries by school accounting code. And the reason we changed that, our school accounting code is the state accounting code as well. Those are the functions and the object codes that they list in their accounting manual is what we use here in the district. So the intention was to update the terminology, the state code classification. That seems a little dated, that verbiage. It's not something you typically hear now. So the intent with that was just to put it in terms that the general reader would understand. So school accounting code, but if there's we call that state accounting code, and it would, for me, hold the same meaning, but if that would be more clear, we could do that.
Could you reference it to say by state's school accounting code? The state's school accounting code? So it indicates that it's still related to
The state.
the state. However, the terminology is updated to reflect current terminology that's utilized by finance directors across the state.
Yes, that makes sense.
And is
Mrs. Byfield?
is the legal reference on this, is that relating back to the school accounting code?
And I did pull it up, and it still is relevant.
Okay,
One, yeah.
so when we're looking at that 4th paragraph and we're seeing school accounting code, regardless of what we're calling it, the legal reference is referencing those codes that we need to follow.
Yes.
So there's no ambiguity in there on who or where it comes from. The legal reference is the code that we're using regardless of what the verbiage is. Okay.
Any other questions on DC? Okay. Seeing none, we will put this on a first reading. And Mrs. Bonnefield, can you also put on for a first reading the removal of DCDA and DCE?
Yep, okay, yep.
And that brings us to DD.
Wonderful. And I'll read through this. Title of the policy is Line Item Transfer Authority. No Board of Education member or employee of the school district shall expend any funds or obligate the expenditure of any funds except pursuant to appropriations made by the Board of Education through the budget and in keeping with the fiscal board policies adopted by the board. Changes in the amount appropriated by the board shall require approval by the board. The superintendent is charged with general supervision of the execution of the budgets adopted by the board and shall hold the employees of the school district responsible for the performance of their responsibilities within the fiscal board policies adopted by the board. Commensurate with this charge and for the purpose of meeting emergency needs, the superintendent is authorized to transfer between codes an amount not to exceed $50,000 prior to approval by the Board of Education. So going to highlight a few of the changes, some of the original language in the first paragraph, budgetary policy statement, that isn't a term we use anymore. So it's, our feeling that that's referencing to the fiscal board policies that we're going over right now. So that's the change there. The next one I wanted to point out, we changed department heads to employees of the school district, and that was actually to be more comprehensive, to say that it's not just department heads that are necessarily responsible for the budget of a certain program. That we have a coach, for instance, that could be responsible for their line item. So the intent of changing it from department heads to employees of the school district is meant to cover anybody that has responsibility over a particular budget or revenue.
Would it make sense to add the words who are Yeah, okay, so I'm on the second line, by the board, and shall hold the employees of the school district responsible, if we said employees of the school district who are responsible for the performance of their responsibilities within fiscal board policies adopted by the board, trying to get to that, these are referencing employees who have fiscal responsibility related to the program they're overseeing. Again, department heads is probably too narrow. But trying to connect that this is referencing employees of the school district. Let me see if that would be worded correctly, who
Yeah,
are.
that's not gonna be worded
Or
correctly.
who have fiscal responsibility for the performance of those duties.
And it says shall hold the employees responsible. If you change that, then what are you holding them for? You have to expand the language.
And I don't like holding them responsible for the performance of their responsibilities.
Yeah, that needs to be changed. Performance of their duties? No?
Or their charges.
Accountable for the first responsible?
That would work.
Shall hold the employees of the school district accountable for the performance of their responsibilities. No? No?
That's not getting to what Andrea is suggesting.
Hold accountable the employees of the school district.
It does fix the responsible for responsibilities, though.
Yeah.
Could you
It's
say,
their
shall
responsibility.
hold accountable employees of the school district who maintain responsibility
Can we
for
back,
executing?
can we back up one a little bit and just, rather than trying to wordsmith this, can we sort of, in a much shorter sentence, say exactly what we're, you know, we want employees who are responsible for some part of the budget need to stay within that budget, is pretty much what we're trying to say, right? So rather than wordsmith it, can we just come up with a sentence?
Rewrite that sentence.
That says exactly that. If you're responsible for a budget code or a line item, you got to stay within it.
So why don't we have Mrs. Smith and I draft a new sentence, we'll send it to our policy chair, Mrs. Burton. If you're comfortable with that, then we'll include it in Thursday's packet. And then if you have further suggestions, that would be absolutely appropriate, because then we have, you know, another week and a half before it has to come to vote. And so we can include it in this week's packet, and you would have time to then respond to Mrs. Burton and let us know if there's any additional changes.
And make sure, as always, if you're responding back, that we do not reply all. Since this is an item on which we will be voting, we need to make certain that we are abiding by the Open Meetings Act. Mrs. Jarvis?
One other comment about this policy. Is $50,000 enough? Because this was written 30 years ago, and $50,000 then is not the same as it is today.
Maybe that's
Mrs. Bonnefield?
Maybe that's part of something that you guys can chat about and sort of look at and see whether or not that's a reasonable amount, and bring another suggestion if necessary.
That sounds good.
And
we can take a look, just historically, you know, what situations have come up.
Oh, yeah, has anything ever come up when you've had to use that?
Yeah. And is it still prudent? You know, I mean, maybe even though Mrs. Jarvis is correct, $50,000 30 years ago is much different than it is today, but perhaps
it's still
because of our budgeting situations and our limited resources, that maybe it's still an applicable amount.
Revisit that.
For different reasons than maybe originally. Are we okay with putting it on as a first reading? We're good?
I'm
Put it
fine-
on as
I'm
a
fine with that, and even though we know
first
we will
reading.
have.
Right, well,
Right.
and the intention of a first reading is that we bring it publicly and there's still room for
Absolutely.
Making it.
making
Keep in mind
adjustments.
that we're going to have 2 weeks, too, because we don't have a meeting next Monday, so we'll have more than
Right.
adequate
So
time
that should be
to.
fine.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I've got a first reading on this one.
On DD. President Johnson, that concludes our policy committee.
Thank you, Mrs. Burton. And that brings us to item 8, Legislative Committee. Mrs. Bradford, do you have anything to
Thank
add
you,
to the
Mrs. Smith.
discussion this evening?
I do not.
Anything from Mrs. O'Quist?
Not that I'm going to cover this evening, considering the time where we are. I shared with you a brief update about the school safety legislation. I will have in your packet this week some extended information regarding current legislation that's before our state lawmakers, with some commentary on that. So if you could just look out for that in your packet.
Okay, very good. Mrs. Bonnefield.
Mrs. O'Quist, just, this isn't, I'm not suggesting that we have a conversation, but just something that really kind of distressed me when you were giving us a little overview earlier in the meeting of some of this security legislation, is that my unfunded mandate bells went off. So,
Mine too.
you know, I think this is one of those things where maybe they're giving us more money and it looks really good on the surface, but in the end, you know, if they're asking us to do a huge amount of data processing, you know, that's, if that completely outweighs any funding that they give us for one thing or another, if that, we can just make sure that that's very clear again, that, you know, what they're, just because they're giving us dollars doesn't mean that it's not costing us more than they're giving us.
Totally agree. That's certainly something I'm keeping a close eye on with regard to some of the proposed legislation.
Thank you.
You bet.
I think that's something we're all sensitive to.
Yes, yes.
I think I read that there also is a bill on the floor or up for discussion about unfunded mandates, that they're trying to, with each bill that's passed, especially these school, or MASB is advocating for, when these school budgets are passed for school safety, that there is a line item that says this is how much it will cost to implement this. So if that happens, then we will have real dollars, hopefully, that say this is how much it's going to cost you to get this much money. It's going to cost you this much money. But I'm not sure how far that is in the legislative process either.
You know, it's a topic that's been taken up quite a bit over the past 5 years, is asking districts to try to put a dollar amount on some of these unfunded mandates. And we have had a couple of individual lawmakers who have taken that up as something they brought forward to their colleagues. It does not generally gain a whole lot of traction, but I think it is important. Again, I don't think anyone would be opposed to additional funding for school safety legislation. You know, our concern is just, quite simply, some of the reporting that they're discussing would be extraordinarily time-intensive for either our school security personnel, which is a bit of a, not what we want them doing, or our school administration. And again, you know, two sets of folks who have pretty full plates and who we like to be concentrating on what's best for our learners, so.
Alrighty, we're all set. Thank you to all my colleagues for hanging in there, and anyone watching from home, likewise. And we are now concluded. Thank you.